The story begins with a little boy sitting over the bed and holding the hand of an unconscious girl. He cried and begged a girl named Lali to open her eyes. The boy begged the heavens for the girl to regain consciousness. And unfortunately, she continued to lie on her bed and did not respond to the little boy's touches and words. But then her eyes barely opened and she whispered the word, "Your Highness." The little boy couldn't contain his joy that Lali had finally opened his eyes, so he froze for a few minutes as if frozen. The boy did not let go of the girl's hand and did not believe that she finally opened her eyes and looked at him. He was so surprised that he watched in silence and did not know what to answer. Lali got up, looked at the little boy and asked in surprise what brought him to her bedroom at such a late hour, because until today he had never come to her so late. The boy was finally able to explain that he was very worried about her well-being, so he had come here to make sure she was okay. Lali smiled and said that she was just overtired and that she was fine. The girl explained that she needs to rest a little and tomorrow she will be in full order. But the boy said that no matter how much he called her, she did not respond to his words, so he got scared. Lali felt guilty that she had made His Highness worry so much about his health, so tears welled up in her eyes as well. Although she was very happy that the boy was so sincerely worried about her. The boy said that he was not jokingly afraid that she would never open her eyes again, so he did not leave her for a minute. He then asked if she would keep her promise to be by his side. The girl was very moved by such a confession of the little boy, and could not refuse the little man who was looking into her eyes with such hope and waiting for an answer, so she agreed. Although in fact the young girl's name was not Lali at all, she could not confess this to anyone except herself, so this secret was only her personal. Once she lost her balance on a very old bridge and flew into the abyss. During the fall, her whole life flashed before her eyes, but in a moment complete darkness came. When the young girl opened her eyes, she found herself in the body of the minor heroine of the novel she was reading on the eve of her death. This novel was called One Dream, and it really impressed the girl. The place where the events of the novel unfolded was the Empire of the Guardians of Fire. I am Fodi, and the main character of the plot is Tiger Renario, who was the only principal that could not awaken the power of fire. The young girl found herself in the body of a servant named Lali, and she had one grave sin. She tried to steal the inheritance of the young prince and accidentally broke it. When the young heir found out about this terrible act of his maid, he was so angry that he channeled the power of fire into himself and burned the young girl to ashes with just one look. Since then, not one of the descendants of the royal family has been able to even come close to the enormous power that Tyr had. And the story itself told about the prince's heart injury, which was inflicted on him by a girl. In order to survive in that situation, the girl tried to fundamentally change the story of the novel, and during the 6 years she spent in the body of a maid, the girl took care of the prince so that he grew up in complete comfort. And very soon the young girl managed to tie the young prince to her so much that he could not imagine his life without a maid named Lali, and sincerely cared about her well-being. From now on, Tyr ceased to be the tyrant that was mentioned in the novel One Dream, and the young girl expected that her efforts would not be in vain and she would manage to survive in this life. The young girl was worried about only one thing: whether the prince would be able to awaken his power on his own if she completely changed the plot of the novel. So she watched the development of events with interest. Suddenly, someone knocked on her door and she thought that the boy had come again to inquire about her condition. But when she opened her eyes, she saw a rag approaching her face. After a moment, the rag completely covered her mouth and the young girl had nothing to breathe. A thought flashed through her mind. Is she really going to leave this world so quickly and her efforts to survive were in vain? The young girl again plunged into complete darkness, and as soon as she managed to open her eyes, she heard voices that were glad that she had regained consciousness. A young girl was lying on the snow-white bedclothes and blinked her eyes in surprise. She could not understand what had happened, because a second ago the girl could not breathe at all. A man came closer to the bed and asked if Alicia was feeling well. It was clear from the expression on his face that he was not jokingly afraid for her life, so he was glad when she came to. The girl sat confused on the bed and looked around the room in which she found herself. But neither the interior nor the men who were at her bedside were familiar to her. She looked with interest at the men who came closer to her and tried to understand where she was now and what the hell was going on here. The girl understood that they addressed her by the name Alicia, but she had no idea who this young girl was. Therefore, she silently watched everything that was happening and did not know how to react. A man who looked to be in his 50s approached and touched her face. He said he was very happy that his daughter was back with them and doing well. When the girl examined her body, she was shocked by what she saw. After all, it was not the body she was used to. Therefore, in her head, she went through the options of who she could be at the moment. At first, she had hoped that it was just a dream and she tried to pinch herself to wake up and become a maid again. But after feeling the pain, nothing changed, and the girl remained in place. The man heard how the girl cried out in pain and immediately called a doctor to examine his daughter's condition. Everyone worriedly began to ask about her well-being and ran up to the girl. Having experienced death once, the young girl again returned to this closed circle and did not know how to get out of it. Strangers were bustling around her, calling her by an unfamiliar name. The young girl only realized that she had to be reincarnated once again, and from that moment her life began with a blank sheet of paper. Every day, the maids and the family's personal doctor couldn't help but rejoice over the fact that the girl looked absolutely healthy and full of strength after 7 long years of coma. The young girl tried to support the people who cared so much for her, and said that it was all thanks to the fact that they took good care of her, and she was very grateful to them for that. The doctor did not expect words of thanks, so tears appeared in his eyes. The girl asked why he gets so emotional every time he examines her. The man apologized for his sentimentality and explained that before she regained consciousness, she would have immediately kicked him out and not even explained anything, which is why he is so surprised. The old man had never heard more pleasant words in his entire life, so he couldn't help but cry. The young girl told him to organize his thoughts in the fresh air and smiled. The maids helped the doctor out of the room. Meanwhile, the young girl thought how angry the princess was, if a simple thank you caused such stormy emotions in the respectable doctor. As soon as the young girl was left alone in the room, she went to the mirror and examined herself. A very pretty green-eyed beauty with golden hair was looking at her from there. 7 years ago, the youngest princess of the kingdom of Ashtad was struck by lightning and fell into a coma for 7 long years. Therefore, when she came to her senses, there was a real celebration in the whole kingdom. By some miracle, the girl ended up in the body of a young princess. But the fact that the maid Lali should have died exactly 7 years ago was an even bigger mystery. The girl had a question about why she woke up in this particular body when so much time had passed, and why she forced the body of Princess Ashtad to wake up. Thierry, who was already 20 years old at that time 3 years ago, was supposed to organize a bloody rebellion, as a result of which he was supposed to start ruling on his bloody throne. Although in the memory of the young girl, Thierry always remained an innocent boy who held her hand at night and shuddered at every unusual noise. The question remained whether he met the main character, as it was written in the novel, and why it was necessary to kill the maid Lala, because she was the target of the murder, because the prince remained unharmed. In the young girl's head, all the fragments of this story did not fit together. Therefore, she felt her head ache and decided to deal with it a little later. The current life of the young girl was very different from the original plot of the novel, and this scared the girl even more, because she was simply lost in guessing what would happen next. The girl was worried about the fact that she would permanently sever ties with Thierry and began to regret that she tried so hard to please him as a maid that she changed the story. She thought that perhaps he had already met his love and had still forgotten how he had asked her to never leave him. The girl thought that Thierry had completely forgotten his unremarkable maid from childhood. All these thoughts did not leave the young girl, and she pondered the fate of Thierry all her free time. So she constantly walked alone and was completely immersed in her thoughts. While at the family dinner table, she heard someone call her name and came back from her wild thoughts to everyday reality. One of the men at the table asked if she was overworked these past few days, because he was constantly watching her walking around the gardens of their estate. Alicia replied that there is no need to worry about her, because she tries not to overwork herself and it is the walks that restore her strength. She also assured that everything is fine with her. But one of the brothers still worried about her formal communication with her family members, after she regained consciousness after a 7-year coma. Another of the brothers also added that he had the impression that in her dreams she was taking endless etiquette lessons, because they had not heard such polite communication from her since childhood. The men said they didn't recognize their sister at all, and Alicia smiled guiltily. The girl said that she cannot behave like a cranky child all her life, but her brother assured her that with them she can behave as she pleases and not spoil the well-bred lady. He also added that he had no idea where she got such polite words. He noted that this is how he likes to communicate with her more, because earlier she would have preferred to communicate with the wall than to spend a moment with her relatives. The father turned to Harrison and asked him not to annoy Alicia, because whatever she is their blood and there is no past and present his own daughter. The son tried to justify himself to his father and pointed out up front that he didn't mean exactly what his father thought. But before he could prove his point, Alicia cut him off. She tenderly turned to her brother and said that the main thing is that he likes her like that. the brother turned red with anger and began to make excuses that this was not what he meant. And then he got confused himself. The other brother smiled and asked Harrison not to make excuses, because he also completely agreed with his opinion. Alicia thought at the time that she liked the honesty of the brothers, but then the men returned to discussing important issues. One of the brothers reported that they had strengthened the border guard and asked his father if there were important reasons for that. The elder brother said that a few days ago an unknown man was seen on the border, who most of all belonged to the Fia Empire. Alicia shuddered at the familiar name. The father ordered his sons not to lose vigilance and to report every incident immediately. Everyone knew that if Emperor Fia wanted something, he would achieve it by any means. The father noted that a bloody war could break out. Harrison then asked why they didn't consider options like compromise or a peace treaty and immediately jumped to extremes. The father himself understood that it would be quite irresponsible and senseless to enter into a war with the Empire of Fia, but he regretfully added that they were unable to fulfill the condition of Emperor Fia. After all, from what they knew, his condition was to reveal the location of the elves. Alicia remembered that Tyr's mother was an elf in the original novel, but she didn't understand why he was trying to find them. The father told his sons that indeed Tyr demanded the surrender of all the elves they knew. Harrison couldn't take it anymore and jumped up from his chair. He shouted how they would know the whereabouts of those elves. And the father bowed his head and said that this was the problem. Each country that failed to comply with the emperor's request disappeared from the face of the earth one by one, and Tierra didn't care that they really didn't know where the elves were. Now it dawned on Alicia that Tyr could really start a bloody war with the country where she was now in the role of crown princess. The Tahel kingdom had ceased to exist last year at the hands of Emperor Fia, so they were worried that their kingdom would be next. People were worried that Emperor Fia would have the courage to invade their kingdom, and everyone argued that the elves were the reason for this. The kingdom of Ashtad was surrounded by deep blue lakes and snowy forests. Due to its northern location, it was extremely difficult for foreigners to reach this kingdom, and it is for this reason that many wars were bypassed by the kingdom of Ashtad. This place has always had an inseparable connection with nature, because its ideal location contributed to this. All members of the royal family from generation to generation awakened in themselves spiritual powers connected with natural phenomena. For this, they were known far beyond the kingdom. Alice had witnessed the conversations of the servants, so she immediately guessed that it was no wonder why Tyr believed that this was where the elves were. These were ideal natural conditions for their hiding. Alicia thought that no other blood, except the royal one, had such a close connection with the human being, and this was the real reason. The young girl thought that Tyr was so eager to find traces of the elves because he wanted to find someone as close in blood as his own mother. Alicia was just shocked that among the thousands of kingdoms, she had moved to this one. And what's more, at a time when she thought she was completely safe. Recently, the young girl spent a lot of time in the library and tried to find at least some information about reincarnation. But she never managed to find anything about reincarnation. Alicia went further and further. She thought that if she met a wise man, she would bombard him with questions to which she could not find answers. Then she came to her senses, thinking about where she was going. The road in the forest was unfamiliar to her, and Alicia realized that she had never been here before. In addition, she felt a strange, creepy look on her. That look touched her to the very inner organs, and she stopped for a moment. The girl thought about where she was and whether she herself was in this forest. Alicia was standing on the road in the dark forest, and her soul felt eerie from the realization that someone was behind the bushes and was closely watching her. Then the young girl heard the roar of some kind of beast, and it became even more frightening for her. At first, she thought to run away, but in a moment the animal jumped out of the bushes and was already next to Alicia. The beast fell on the girl with all its weight and knocked her off her feet. Lying on the ground, the young girl felt the wolf's heavy paw on her back. The first thing that came to the young girl's mind was to pretend to be dead, because she knew that in this case her chances of being saved increased. That's why she did it. Alicia lay motionless for several minutes and felt that nothing was happening. Then she opened her eyes and looked at the animal. The beast looked at her and did not move. The young girl thought that she had made a mistake, and an ordinary dog jumped on her. But then, after all, Alicia had doubts about this, because this animal was too big for the dog. The animal began to caress the young girl, and Alicia stood up from the ground. She also stroked the dog in response and carefully looked at it. Those eyes and fur were quite familiar to Alicia. Once, a long time ago, in her past life, she saw such a beast, but very small with a wounded paw. Their first meeting was also in the forest. Then she was the maid Lala, who, together with His Highness, saw a small dog that injured its paw. Thierry bent down to the animal and began to examine its wounds. At first, the animal was rather aggressive towards people and did not let them near it. But then it established contact with the boy and began to caress the little one. The girl had never seen such enthusiasm in the eyes of the young prince, so she offered him to take the animal with him and treat his wound. The maid did not have time to tell that she would take care of him herself, and very soon they would cure the animal, when Thierry took it in his arms and joyfully shouted that they would take him to their house. The happy boy was holding a wounded animal in his arms, and there was so much happiness in his eyes that the girl did not dare to deny his highness in any way. Since then, this animal appeared in the house of the young prince. Together with the maid, they washed his wound and tried to please the animal with all kinds of goodies. After a few days, the wounds on the animal's paws healed, and he happily greeted his owners with a cheerful bark. Thierry kept asking why he was so restless. The maid said that she thought that when the wound healed, the animal would immediately leave their house and return to the forest. But judging by its behavior, she was not going to leave them. Then the maid offered to give a name to this animal, and the boy happily agreed. So the animal with black fur and yellow eyes got the name Rudd, which meant the famous wolf. The boy looked at their new resident and said that this name suits him very well, so he will be happy to call him that. Since then, the wolf Rudd appeared in their estate. Alicia petted the wolf and thought to herself that 7 years was quite a long time, and their Rude from a past life was just as docile and intelligent as this wolf. The animal sat down on its hind legs and began to howl. Alicia smiled and thought that after all she was not mistaken and it was not a dog, but a real wolf. Then a question arose in the young girl's mind. Why this wild animal is so docile next to her, and moreover, it looks like an animal from her past life, which she found together with Thierry. Suddenly the wolf put its paws on Alicia's head and started playing with her. In her heart, the young girl was both happy and surprised at the same time, because she could not believe that she had found her Rudd. She laughed merrily and fended off the wolf's caresses, asking him what he had decided to do. Alicia did not even hear how another unknown man approached them. A man's voice sternly asked the wolf what he was doing, and because of this, the animal froze as if it had been buried. Alicia also thought for a moment that she had already heard this voice somewhere. A young man in a dark cloak with a hood came out onto the lawn. The girl could not get a good look at his face and therefore immediately began to think about who he was. Alicia was not jokingly scared because she did not know who was approaching her, and she did not understand how he could get here, because outside entry into this forest is strictly prohibited. When the man approached her, she dared to ask him who he was. She also told the wolf to stop playing because they seemed to have uninvited guests. The wolf with yellow eyes immediately calmed down and lay down at the feet of the young girl. This alarmed her even more, because before that she did not know how to tame this restless animal. Alice? I looked at the wolf lying next to her and could not understand what exactly affected the animal, whether it was her request or the appearance of this stranger. Frightened, Alicia sat on the ground, and next to her lay the wolf meekly. She did not know what to expect next and therefore was afraid to even move. But something changed in the atmosphere on the lawn in the last minute. The stranger turned to the wolf in a stern voice and said that he thought that the animal was going to kill the young girl and therefore came here to see what was happening here. The animal seemed to understand what the stranger was talking about and began to play with the young girl's hand with its tail. Alicia felt goosebumps from the surprise. The man disappointedly said that this is not at all like the behavior of his animal, and he does not understand what is happening here. It was clear from his facial expression that he expected something else from the wolf. Then the man called the wolf and ordered him to come to him. The animal at the same second obeyed the stranger's command, got up and slowly walked towards the man. Alicia nevertheless overcame her fear and asked if he was the owner of this wolf. The stranger patted the animal on the head and quickly replied that you can say that. The young girl tried to somehow support the conversation and asked if the animal had a name somewhere. In the depths of her soul, she still wanted to hear that his name was Rudd, but she was afraid of it. The man replied disgruntled that the animal had a name, but he lost it together with his owner. Therefore, he does not address this wolf by name now. Alicia got up from the ground and guiltily said that she understood what he was talking about, and mentally noted that he had a mistress after all. So this alarmed the young girl even more. Alicia noticed that the stranger did not want to communicate with her, so she decided to use this opportunity and quietly go away from here, away from trouble. But she did not have time to take a couple of steps when she heard a wolf's howl from behind. She stopped and looked scared at the animal. The heart began to beat at a frantic speed. This development of events did not please the stranger, and he began to approach Alicia, asking her why the wolf did not want to let her go. The girl was frightened and whispered that she did not know. Then Alicia began to justify that animals are extremely sensitive creatures, and for sure that he just saw kindness and sincerity in the young girl. That's why he didn't want to let her go. The man came so close to Alice that she lost her breath. She froze and couldn't move. The only thing she did was scrutinizing his face. The man himself, when he looked at Alicia, thought that he was seeing his maid, whom he loved so much in childhood and who suddenly disappeared from his life without ever keeping her promise. It was unbearable for the man to look at the young girl when such personal memories were raging in his head, so he covered his eyes with his hand and looked away. He did not expect this from himself, so he got angry. To Alicia, I myself was afraid of his condition and asked if he was doing well. She noticed how in his eyes there was unbearable despair, and it began to bother her. But then, when their eyes met, the young girl noticed that there was only anger in the stranger's gaze, so she felt very uncomfortable and wanted to leave here as soon as possible. But Alicia could not take even a couple of steps. She realized that her body was not obeying her, so she continued to stand as if she was buried. The stranger turned sharply and shouted to the wolf to follow him. The animal could not disobey its owner, so it guiltily turned and followed the stranger, although the young girl noticed unbearable sadness in his yellow eyes. Alicia was also sorry to let go of the wolf, with whom they got along so well, and neither the animal nor the young girl had any other choice. Therefore, the wolf quickly ran to catch up with the stranger. Only when the stranger and his wolf had already disappeared behind the trees, the young girl breathed a sigh of relief and said aloud that she finally felt safe. Alicia began to wonder who he was. After all, because of his evil look which came out of red glass eyes, she was so afraid that she did not even ask his name. Then the young girl made a decision to leave here as soon as possible, so that God forbid not to meet that stranger again, although she did not even suspect that fate had other plans. That night, the young girl had some nightmares. She tossed and turned in her bed and couldn't sleep well. At midnight, she remembered a meeting with a stranger in the forest, and when she managed to fall asleep, little Thierry came to her, who constantly asked her why she left him, although she promised to stay with him forever. Through the dream, the young girl tried to explain that she did not leave him at all and she was going to keep her promise, and the circumstances were such that she was killed. The girl was fast asleep and did not hear the man approach her door at all. He opened the door and readjusted the melee weapon on his belt. The man took a step and found himself in Alicia's bedroom. After a few seconds, his hand reached out to the young girl and he shouted her name, and then quickly told Alicia to wake up immediately. It was her younger brother, Harrison. The young girl sat up in bed and rubbed her eyes. She looked at her younger brother in confusion and could not understand why he had come to her bedroom at such a late hour. But Harrison was quick to point out that they didn't have much time left, so she should throw on her robe and quickly follow him. He will explain everything else later. The young man was pulling Alicia by the hand and walking quickly down the corridor. He tried to explain to her on the way that they were going to the audience hall. Alicia had never seen Harrison so worried. Alicia tried to find out if something had happened in the estate that night, and Harrison, surprised, asked how she could sleep at all when such things were happening in the palace. Then the young man quickly said that they needed to get to the hall as soon as possible because they were waiting there, and in that very room there was a secret passage that they would have to use today. After these words, Alicia was no joke, because secret passages were used by royal families only in the event that a war began and the family was in danger. Approaching the hall, Harrison stopped and put a hood on Alicia's head. He said a few words to the guard and he opened the door to the room. As soon as Alicia and Harrison went inside, the father worriedly said that he had finally waited for them and asked his daughter to come closer to him. Alicia complied with his request. The young girl noticed that, in addition to her father, there were several of his personal guards in the room who were covering the windows and doors to the hall, as well as her older brother. Alicia was not jokingly scared and worriedly asked her father and older brother Fidel what was happening here. But she already understood the answer to her question from the expression on their faces. As she had guessed, her father told her that the Emperor Fodia was on his way to their kingdom and should be here any minute. That is why they gathered in this place together. The father told Alicia in a stern voice that she had not yet awakened her spiritual powers, so she should take her guards with her and use a secret passage to get to a safe place. Alicia did not want to leave her father and brothers alone with Thierry, because she knew from the novel about his terrible, tyrannical character, so she asked her relatives what they were going to do next. Alicia's question, when their bodyguard shouted for His Highness to beware, and they only saw how he fell dead, crippled by a sword. The door to the audience hall opened and a stranger entered. A dead guard was lying in a pool of blood at his feet. Father shouted for Alicia to run away quickly. The brothers went to the mysterious passage and dragged the young girl behind them. They chased her, trying to save her younger sister from Emperor Phodia. The father shouted to the emperor to stop, but the emperor only defiantly replied that if anyone tried to stop him, he would burn this entire palace to the ground. When the young girl carefully looked at the emperor, her heart almost stopped from fear. She realized that it was him she met the day before in the forest with the wolf. Phodia's threats were not empty words, and with his one look he burned all the objects that were next to Alicia and her personal maid in a second. Harrison barely had time to hug his younger sister so that she would not be touched by the flames from the gaze of Emperor Phodia. Her heart was pounding at a frantic speed, because she was one step away from death. The maid also barely managed to escape from the flames and hid behind the king's guards. The king himself shouted for everyone to move to a safe distance and hide behind him. The king shouted in a stern voice to Emperor Phodia that he was allowing himself to do anything in his palace, because if he continued like this, he might burn everything here. Alicia squeezed her younger brother's hand tighter and asked him if this man was really the Emperor of Phodia. The young girl could not believe that Thierry was standing in front of her, but the emperor only laughed in response. He added that he had burned his own palace to hell, so he would not even think twice before burning the palace of the kingdom of Ashtad. She once again took a closer look at the young man who was brandishing a bloody sword in the middle of the audience hall, and did not find any common feature with the Thierry she had known once upon a time. Alicia clearly knew that Thierry's eyes were a sky-gray color. She always admired this unusual color when they went for walks, and the sky blue was reflected in those eyes. But now the young girl clearly saw that Emperor Phodia's eyes were red, and even she, the girl who had spent his entire childhood with him, became uneasy from one of his glances. For a moment, the young girl thought, if his eyes changed color, it meant that he had awakened his power of fire and without the help of the maid Lala. Alicia looked into his eyes and realized that she had often seen this gaze in her past life, and she also paid attention to his lower lip, which was one in one, like the little prince's. Meanwhile, the king of the kingdom of Ashtad shouted to the Emperor of Phodia that even if he managed to sneak into his palace, it does not mean that he will be able to get everything he wants. At the same time, the king put down his sword and concentrated his spiritual power in his hand. A swirl of blue color filled everything around King Ashtad, and it was simply incredible. Alicia had never seen such a sight with her own eyes, so she could not take her eyes off the king's majestic power. The power was so great that it filled the entire hall. Meanwhile, Alicia could not take her eyes off Emperor Phodia, and now she knew with 100% certainty that it was Thierry. For a moment they exchanged glances with him. The emperor noticed a young girl among those present in the hall and immediately remembered where he had recently met her. Therefore, he shouted to the king that he had another proposal. The Emperor Phodia announced that he now demands to give him a young girl who is in this hall and is a princess of the kingdom of the state. Such a statement made Alicia's blood run cold. A lot of thoughts immediately swirled in her head, and she could not yet realize that he demanded to give her to him. In the meantime, her older brother shouted that the Emperor of Phodia should not be foolish. The complacent emperor did not want to listen to any refusals, so he shouted with a smile on his face that refusal of his offer meant immediate death. The guards were not going to stand by, so they shouted to His Highness that they were willing to give their lives to punish Emperor Phodia for such an insult. Thierry only laughed in response and shouted that the guards were too brave, so it would be a shame to kill them. And at the same moment, he sent a pillar of fire towards the guards. The king immediately prepared to repulse the attack and prevented the pillar of fire from killing his guards in time. An incredible explosion occurred from the collision of such super-powerful energies. Then, without thinking for a long time, the king decided to attack the self-righteous emperor and took this opportunity to send spiritual water power towards Thierry. Everyone held their breath, but the spiritual power of King Ashtad completely shattered against the protection of Emperor Phodia, and he only scoffed at the fact that he was disappointed in the strength of his opponent. While the king caught his breath, his youngest son Harrison drew his sword and challenged Emperor Phodia to a duel. He wanted to avenge his father at any cost. Only God knew how it would end. And suddenly the door opened and a strange man entered the hall. He offered to lay down all the weapons and not to rush. The man apologized for being late and introduced himself. This was the chief advisor of His Highness the Emperor Phodia, Woken. The advisor offered to listen to the emperor's proposal. Alicia's older brother, who supported his father and tried to help him regain his strength, shouted that his proposal was more like a threat, so they would not listen to him. But the advisor smiled and said in a calm tone that they should consider everything in perspective, because the emperor always keeps his word, and added that only they dictate the conditions here. The advisor added that despite their superiority, they are still negotiating, and ask the representatives of the Ashtat kingdom to assess the situation realistically. Harrison drew his sword. Alicia's younger brother stepped forward and shouted that they would not negotiate, but the father asked his son to move back, noting that Harrison was not their opponent. The advisor thanked the king for his cooperation and announced that while Alicia would be in the emperor's palace, the kingdom of Ashtat must fulfill some conditions of his highness. Alicia was shocked that taking her away was only part of the emperor's offer. Meanwhile, the angry father shouted that they knew nothing about elves. But the emperor did not want to listen to their refusals and simply advised them not to be so naive and senseless, but rather to listen to the terms of the agreement and fulfill all the points. Harrison was not going to tolerate such statements towards the royal family, so he grabbed his sword again and shouted that the emperor would have to answer for his words. Thierry said in a calm tone that he gave a chance to save the life of the royal family, so the young man should push his selfishness far away and think about his relatives. The emperor also added that he could turn their palace into a pile of ashes with one glance. Alicia looked at this man and realized that he was no longer the Thierry she knew before. Alicia understood that if they continue to resist, it will only anger the emperor and he will burn everything to the ground. Therefore, she quietly said that she agreed. Her father yelled at her not to do anything stupid. The brothers also asked their younger sister not to make hasty decisions and not agree to such conditions. No one wanted to give the princess to the Emperor Fodia, but Alicia said in a calm tone that this is currently the only way to save the kingdom of Ashtat, and mentally added that this is also the only way to save her own life. The father looked at his own daughter with a sad look and quietly spoke her name. He really didn't want her to make such a decision, and his mind told him that they had no other choice. Alicia also understood that if they did not make a decision immediately, the demands could become much more brutal, and she made a decision to save herself and her family at any cost. Her gaze again met with Emperor Fodia's gaze. A satisfied smile appeared on his face, and he said loudly that he would be glad to welcome her to his palace. Thierry also added that the only person with common sense among all those present turned out to be a young girl, which he could not have expected. Suddenly, a huge wolf entered the hall. Everyone present was breathless. The animal walked majestically around the room, and it seemed that nothing could stop it from doing whatever it wanted. The wolf examined everyone present and began to move towards Princess Ashtad. The guards grabbed their weapons and rushed to rescue Her Highness. Alicia's brothers also rushed to their younger sister. Alicia was not lost in this situation. She confidently extended her hand to the wolf and waited for him to come closer to her. Her cold-blooded composure even made her father uneasy. The wolf approached the young girl and meekly waited for her to pet him. He did not have long to wait. Alicia stroked the stern wolf and he wagged his tail like a domestic dog. Everyone present was simply speechless at such a sight. Even the emperor's advisor could not contain his emotions and said out loud that such a thing simply cannot be. At first, Alicia thought she should have turned away and pretended to be confused. But for once, she didn't want to hide her relationship with this majestic wolf. Now she understood that this wolf turned out to be Rudo, that little defenseless animal that she and Thierry had found 7 years ago wounded in the forest. Only a blind person could fail to notice how intently the emperor looked at Alicia. For a moment, she even began to worry if he did not recognize her. They stood facing each other and looked at each other in silence. Those present also kept their eyes on the young people and the severe wolf, who did not leave Princess Ashtad even a step away. Then the young girl clearly decided that if she had to find herself again in the kingdom of Fodia, then she must learn everything about the death of the maid Lala. Therefore, Alicia said loudly that she is the princess of the Ashtad kingdom, accepting the offer of Emperor Fodia and going with him to his empire right now. A few minutes later, the young girl changed her clothes, put herself in order, and went with the counselor to the carriage. The counselor said that outsiders might think that Alicia was kidnapped. That young girl answered the advisor that she went with them to the palace of the Emperor Fodia of her own free will. Then she raised her head and looked at the window of her parents' room. She saw her father and 2 older brothers watching her through the glass. Alicia noticed that they were taking care of her as if she had already died, instead of going to Fodia. Although the young girl spent a short period of time with her new family after reincarnation, she already managed to get used to them and loved them with all her heart. The young girl never found the answer to the question of why she was reincarnated a second time, but she was jealous of a princess named Alicia, who was so loved in her family. Finally, they ended up in a carriage with Thierry. Alicia was unhappy with the fact that she was riding alone with him, and did not understand why he sat down opposite her so imposingly. The young girl noticed that he was looking at her very intently, and this made her feel uncomfortable. She turned her head away and mentally asked him not to stare at her. Alicia looked out the window and wondered what could have happened in the 7 years since they parted with the little prince. The changes she saw in his character now confused her. She woke up from a 7-year sleep in Alicia's body only a month ago, and he already managed to appear to her in the kingdom of Ashtad and show his tyrannical character in all its glory. The young man turned to the princess and asked why she was looking at him so carefully. Although, in fact, Alicia did not even notice that she was looking at him, because she was thinking about her own. The emperor also added that she probably took advantage of his generosity and generally lost her fear, and forgot that before her was the greatest emperor in Phodia. Then the emperor suggested that she must have seen her unhappy future in his red, scary eyes, and therefore could not look away from them. Alicia thought to herself that she was just staring, and in general, such an eye color distinguishes members of the royal family from others, speaking of their spiritual awakening. But the emperor of Phodia did not wait for an answer from the young girl, and asked if he was right in his assumptions about his eyes. Alicia realized that playing silent with such a wayward man was a futile venture, so she began to make excuses that she had not thought about it at all. The emperor was impatient to wait for the young girl's explanation, so he sternly told her not to make him repeat his question twice. And Alicia replied that she was simply surprised that he considered the color of his beautiful eyes scary, because the color of human eyes directly depends on the melanin pigment. Emperor Phodia was surprised and asked how she knew about this, and repeated an unknown word for him: melanin. Such an explanation seemed rather strange to him. The young girl shrugged her shoulders, and it only now dawned on her that at that time people had not even heard of melanin, so she made a complete fool of herself by saying it. But there was no way back, so the young girl said that she herself did not remember where she learned about him. She must have read it somewhere in the scientific literature. Suddenly, the carriage stopped, and Alicia breathed a sigh of relief that she would finally not have to continue such a tense conversation with the Emperor Phodia. One of the guards knocked on the door of the carriage and informed the Emperor that they had already arrived at the magic portal, so His Highness could leave the carriage. Alicia looked out the window and saw an incredible sight of purple in the sky. Until this moment, she had never seen such magical portals live. Alicia asked the Emperor in a joyful voice if they could finally get out of the carriage, because she couldn't wait for her to be free. When the Emperor nodded, giving her consent to get out of the carriage, Alicia gladly took the opportunity and rose from her seat. The carriage door opened, and one of the guards gave the young girl a hand to help her get out. Alicia sincerely thanked for the help. When the Emperor watched Alicia, his eyes remembered a picture from the distant past, when his maid Lali, in exactly the same pose, gave him wildflowers. Thierry could not understand why in all the movements of Princess Ashtad, he saw his maid Lali, and this already began to confuse him. When Emperor Phodia also got out of the carriage, his aide told them that they had to hurry because the magic portal was about to close. Then the Emperor adjusted his armor and said firmly that they must soon set out on their journey to their Phodian Empire. With the help of magical portals, Alicia and the Emperor found themselves in the Phodia Empire in just one day. And although the young girl spent quite a lot of time here, the greatness of the Empire captivated her. But after arriving in the Empire, the young girl fell seriously ill for 3 days and was confined to bed. Dozens of maids took care of her from morning to night, strictly following the doctor's orders. The young girl stayed in the northern palace, not far from the emperor's personal palace, and despite all her fears, this place turned out to be quite safe and comfortable. They never met Emperor Phodia after her arrival in the empire. She could only assume that he was completely immersed in the important business of running his empire. Although somewhere in the depths of her soul, of course, Alicia wanted him to visit her, because she was sure that the news that she was sick was immediately reported to the emperor. On the other hand, she consoled herself with the fact that he did not have to visit her, because she was not here as his bride, but rather as a hostage. I would continue thinking about Alice, flying somewhere far away in my dreams, and a woman turned to her and the girl turned to greet the visitor. The woman asked how Alicia was feeling. It was the senior servant of the imperial palace, Countess Ante. Alicia replied that she was feeling much better and thanked her for her concern. Auntie said she was glad to hear such news and asked for permission to assign Princess Ashtad a personal maid who would take care of her during the day. The young girl liked Auntie as a person, because she valued such human qualities as straightforwardness and honesty, and the older maid possessed exactly them. A small young girl entered the room. She looked quite young. The senior maid invited the maid to say hello to her new mistress. The maid said her name was Maria Diana, and she also added that it was a great honor for her to serve such an honored guest of their empire as Princess Ashtad. To Alice, I thought that this was quite a good opportunity to make friends with a young girl and better adapt to a new place. She noted that it would be nice to have someone she could trust. Alicia smiled and said that she hoped for the professionalism of her maid, and I thought to myself, whether the girl was really set up to help her, or just to watch over her. Maria bowed and thanked her for being treated so well. She also told her hostess that it is not necessary to communicate with the maid in such an official manner. But the head maid did not let the maid finish her sentence and said that the weather was quite nice today, so if Alicia wanted, they could get everything ready for her walk. The maid looked at the senior maid with a guilty look and realized that she had done something wrong. Alicia was also sure that Ante had killed the maid on purpose. Shrewd Alicia guessed that the older servant was hinting to the maid that she should not get close to her mistress. Alicia then suggested that it might have been Tyr's direct order. The educated young girl did not want to draw attention to this, so she smiled at the senior maid and said, if possible, she would definitely take advantage of such an offer. The senior maid said that a walk through the palace territory is not against the rules, but the maid Maria must accompany the princess. Finally, the senior maid added that Alicia should not go in the direction of the villa, because the atmosphere that prevails there is very unpleasant for foreigners, and they can easily get lost in that area. Alicia just smiled and said that she would definitely take into account her information about the villa, and suggested that we get together as soon as possible to finally breathe fresh air. The elder maid said that the young girl had made the right choice to walk in such fine weather, and ordered the maid Maria to help the princess dress. Alicia had no choice but to accept the help of her personal maid, and they were left alone in the room to change into more comfortable clothes. Maria explained to her landlady that she was ordered to help her choose several outfits, as she had brought almost nothing with her to their palace. Alicia gladly agreed to her help. Also, the maid added that the clothing designer will come to the palace only tomorrow, so the new outfits will be ready in a few days. Alicia was surprised by such excessive care for her appearance. The maid noticed that the landlady did not answer her questions, so she turned to her again. Alicia turned and smiled guiltily at her maid, saying that she was just daydreaming. At that moment, the young girl was worried about only one question. Why did the countess tell her about the villa? Because not everyone can get there anyway. Alicia remembered that the road to the villa was not just confusing, but considered a forest labyrinth. If the senior maid wanted to warn Alicia, it would be better if she didn't say anything about her at all. Then it occurred to Alicia that perhaps the head maid wanted to push the princess to walk the tangled paths in search of this mysterious villa. The maid Maria shouted to Alicia that she had forgotten her umbrella from the sun and promised to quickly take it and catch up with her mistress. Alicia decided not to wait for Maria but to go downstairs. Descending the stairs to the bottom, Alicia paid attention to the fact that all the walls in this palace were hung with works of art. Then she thought that it is not surprising that this palace has another name: gallery. Then the young girl remembered her only friend in this palace and hers in the past life, the maid Maud. Alicia wondered how she was doing now and whether she was working here. Maud worked in the kitchen of the imperial palace and was always looking for an opportunity to pamper Alicia with some incredible goodies, constantly telling her not to tell anyone who treated her. Alicia decided that she must find out about the fate of her friend. But then suddenly she heard how one of the maids quietly told the others that they should be careful, because she was somewhere not far away. The young girl stopped and hid behind a corner in the corridor. She immediately guessed that the maids were gossiping about her and she wanted to hear what was being discussed in the imperial palace right now. The maids discussed that for the last few days she has been seriously ill and confined to bed, so it is possible to speak louder because she will not be able to hear them due to her condition. Also, the maids talked about the extraordinary beauty of Princess Ashtad, and assumed that it was because of her that the Emperor of Phodia took her to him. Alicia noticed that the maids were the same everywhere. One of the maids told that the princess was taken from another kingdom, and before her appearance, their master was not interested in any of the female representatives, except for the maid from his childhood. The maids began to remember the name of that maid, and one of them called Lali's name out loud. A chill ran through the skin of the young girl from what she heard, and she began to listen even more carefully to the conversation. One of the maids almost lost consciousness when she heard the other say Lali's name. She asked if she was in her right mind because this name is completely taboo for them. Alicia could not believe her own ears, and one of the maids told that as soon as someone said the name of that maid out loud, the emperor would kick her out of the palace the very next day. The maid suggested that the relationship between the maid and the emperor was so terrible that he could not even bear her name. Alicia was completely shocked by what she heard. She knew that this was complete nonsense, because before she was killed, the relationship between them was so close that even they gave each other a promise never to part. And now, for just uttering her name, the emperor banishes her to 3 hells. The young girl simply could not understand where such rumors about their relationship with Tyr came from. While the shocked Alicia could not collect the information that she managed to hear from the mouths of the maids, one of them leaned closer to the other and said she knew something else. Alicia strained her hearing, for she was extremely curious as to what the maid would report, and then the maid told her that the maid had done such a thing that the emperor could not forgive her. The maid added that the maid ran away from the small and defenseless emperor when he trusted her as much as possible, and betrayed him by not fulfilling the sacred promise. Alicia almost lost consciousness from surprise, because she did not expect such a turn of events at all. She could not fathom how such a thing could even occur to anyone. Throughout her walk in the fresh air, Alicia pondered what she had heard from the maids. She simply could not come to terms with the fact that she had heard such a brazen lie about herself. She was simply torn from the inside by the fact that first she was killed then, and even after that her reputation was completely trampled, telling all kinds of lies about her. The young girl still decided not to trust the gossip from the maid, and first to find out the truth herself, and then draw conclusions and look for the culprits of her death. Suddenly, a rustling was heard in the bushes and a huge wolf jumped out. He, without thinking, immediately started running to the princess and prepared to pounce on her. The maid did not expect this, so she shouted for the princess to be careful and try to call someone for help. But before she had time to wake up, the wolf was already near them. Maria grabbed her mistress and tried to pull her away from the wolf, which was running at full speed, not seeing anything in front of her towards Alicia. The maid Maria shouted to the young girl that this wolf was very dangerous. But Alicia already extended her hand to him, and the wolf, like a submissive dog, immediately wagged its tail. The confused maid Maria stood behind the princess, not believing her eyes. Alicia smiled at her maid and said that this wolf also likes to have his ear scratched. Maria watched with her mouth open as the fragile young girl was not afraid to touch the wolf. And she was even more surprised by the fact that the animal obeyed Alicia. The wolf began to lick Alicia's face, and she was sure that this animal recognized the real her, and therefore ran to calm her owner after those false gossip. Before they had time to play with the wolf, they heard men's footsteps. Emperor Fodia himself approached the girls and said disgruntled that his wolf would not be happy with the new guest of their empire. Alicia and her maid immediately rose to their feet and bowed their heads. The young girl said that she was glad to welcome the Emperor Fodia, the son of this vast empire. The young man folded his hands on his chest and told Princess Ashtad that she looked quite carefree, and then asked if she felt comfortable here. The young girl did not dare to raise her eyes and meet Tyr's eyes, so she quietly answered that thanks to him, she quickly regained her strength and went for a walk. Thierry grunted in displeasure that this was rather strange, for he had already considered sending her to his father in a wooden box, and he would not want the guarantee of their agreement to lose value. Therefore, he asked her to take care of her health more responsibly and not to cause him any unnecessary worries. Alicia replied that she would try. The princess asked for permission to bow, and mentally noted that she could not get used to this tyrannical honor of Thierry, because in her memory he was a small and gentle boy. Then a wolf approached the young girl and they met his eyes. She saw that the animal wanted to continue playing with its owner. The wolf approached the young girl's hand and leaned his head against her. She couldn't resist the temptation to pet her cute Rude one more time, so she did it right away. She was sad that nothing of her past life was left of Thierry, so she stroked the wolf and said in her mind that she had only him left. Immediately, on a mental level, the wolf understood what his owner was thinking, so he began to lick her, soothing her and distracting her from sad thoughts. And when the young girl almost lost her balance and was already sitting on the ground, she raised her right hand up and pointed to the sky with her index finger, loudly shouting the word, "Tidish." The wolf, as if after some kind of spell, froze in place and did not move. What she saw scared the maid Maria, so she asked Alicia what she had done. The princess didn't even know what to answer the maid, because it was their secret gesture, invented together with Thierry, even when they started to tame the wild wolf many years ago. But even more, the disgruntled emperor caught the young girl by surprise, who sternly asked who she was and how she knew this gesture. Even Alicia's heart stopped beating from his tone. She quickly came up with a plausible excuse and told Thierry that as a child she always did this when dogs attacked her, so she decided to try this word on a wolf. Emperor Fodia was not very satisfied with her explanation, so he asked about her gesture. The princess blinked and did not know what to answer. He repeated the question of what her hand gesture meant. Alicia was completely confused, so she asked Thierry if he sometimes meant a slingshot. The Emperor of Fodia replied indignantly that he was the one asking her what the cursed gesture meant, and that he wanted an answer immediately. But Alicia pretended that everything was normal, petted the wolf again and asked the animal how he guessed that it was showing him the slingshot, and praised Rudd for his cleverness. She was distracted from her frolics with the wolf by the enraged voice of the emperor, who repeated the wolf's call. Only then did it occur to the young girl that he did not call her by name during their meeting. The emperor was already losing patience, so he sternly asked the girl how she got the nickname Wolf, and he expects a quick and truthful answer from the princess. The young girl's body was seized with terror. After all, only now she realized that she could not know the name of the wolf and that she could bring trouble on herself by angering Thierry. While she was going through the answers in her head, Thierry yelled for her to answer immediately. And then the young girl told that she heard it, and when she was passing by some people, the emperor displeasedly asked what kind of people nicknamed the wolf. Alicia bowed her head guiltily and said that she did not know those people, because she saw them for the first time in her life. Displeased, the emperor asked Princess Ashtat why she always managed to get him out of her mind at every meeting. This surprised and fascinated him at the same time. The emperor quickly walked over to the young lady and said that he had heard that the young lady had been feeling quite unwell lately, so it was surprising that she had time to hear this conversation. When he got close to the princess, he sternly said that he thought she could be trusted, but now his opinion has changed dramatically after her latest antics. Therefore, he demanded an explanation from her, why exactly he could trust her. A young girl sat on the ground and just blinked her eyes. She didn't even know how to regain the emperor's trust. Alicia understood why he reacted the way he did. She witnessed the conversation of the maids, who discussed his hatred for Lala, and only then did she remind him of her. She mentally asked His Highness if he really thought she had betrayed him and run away then, breaking her promise, when he needed her support so much. She saw how the emotions of some kind of hatred and anger appeared on the emperor's face, so she wanted to shout to him that she did not abandon him at all and did not betray him many years ago. A wolf intervened in the situation, which obviously did not like that his owner was being treated like this, so he began to growl in the direction of Thierry, and his snarl scared everyone present. The emperor could not believe his eyes and asked the animals if he had lost his mind, showing his master his grin. He did not remember such behavior of the wolf. Confused, the young girl continued to sit on the ground and watch what was happening. Maria tried to help the princess up, because she was also worried about her safety. The emperor looked at the angry wolf, who was trying to protect Princess Ashtad. And then, when he turned his gaze to the young girl herself, Lali appeared again in front of his eyes. Then the young man tried to return to reality and thought that maybe it was not the wolf going crazy, but he himself, seeing this girl as his former maid. Now, of course, it was hard to imagine, but in the past, the young girl liked to have picnics with little Thierry in the cool shade of their favorite garden. Together, they feasted on all kinds of goodies that Maud had prepared for them. And His Highness and Lali were very much looking forward to such an opportunity to be together and talk about various topics. When the young girl offered the little prince to try fresh pastries, he always made sure that she tasted them too. Thierry's maid always explained to him that she would definitely try it too, but it was more important for him to eat, because he still had to grow up to be a great, strong, and wise ruler of the empire. When after all the little one took goodies in his hands, she apologized for not taking good enough care of him, but she would try to improve it every day. The boy always wondered why she apologized for this, because he knew how hard she had to get these goodies so that they could go on picnics together. His Highness said that food is not important to him, and he does not care at all what kind of ruler he will be. It was not important to him whether he would grow up healthy. For the little one, it was always a priority that his maid Lali remained next to him, and he reminded her of this at every opportunity. It would be better for him to eat less and for her to always be with him. That time at the picnic, Lali was very surprised. She couldn't even stand it and asked the little guy when he managed to improve like that, because she remembers from childhood what a tough character he had. But the little boy always said that they had a small age difference and smiled gently at his maid. For a young girl, his sweet smile was like sunshine on a gloomy day. Now Alicia, sitting under a tree and hugging her wolf, reflected on how a small boy managed to grow into such a cruel tyrant who is feared by all kingdoms. She spoke softly to Rude and said that they had often rested with Thierry after the walk, and she remembered it as clearly as if it had only been yesterday. At that moment, the girl felt how the wolf became alert and she heard some footsteps. A handsome young man approached them and said in surprise that he was not alone in this forest. Alicia didn't like someone interrupting her peaceful thoughts about the past, so she asked the man who he was. Maria stood aside and was ready to come to the aid of her owner. A nice brown-haired man introduced himself. It was the vice-captain of the Imperial Detachment of Knights, Oscar Verlick. A smile appeared on his face when he looked at the golden-haired beauty. Then the young man added that His Highness could call him simply Oscar without any official titles. Neither Alicia nor her wolf took their eyes off the young man. At that moment, the young girl noticed that this man already knew who she was. Although, looking at his young age, it was hard to believe that he held the position of vice captain. Then the young man asked permission if he could also rest next to Alicia and promised that he would not disturb her at all. She replied, disgruntled, that he should do what he wants. Of course, Alicia was annoyed that someone violated her solitude and noted about herself that he had already disturbed her. But she understood that this man would not stay away from her just like that. Oscar informed the young lady that the rumors were true, and he now saw with his own eyes that she had become very close to the wolf, although before that he had not recognized anyone but the Emperor. Alicia answered briefly that she must have taken a fancy to him. But Oscar noted that this animal is not so gentle even with its master, so he thinks that the girl has already re-educated him. But the young man did not have time to prove his point when someone turned to him. Oscar cursed and said aloud that he was found here too, although it was quite difficult. A man approached Oscar and said that if he had free time to walk in the woods, he would be perfect for the task. Oscar answered unhappily that he was very busy. At that time, a young girl was sitting with her wolf behind a tree and thought that no one would notice her. But by the voice, she immediately recognized the stranger who had just approached. It was Woken DeWitz. Waken's watchful eye immediately noticed the hem of the young girl's dress, and he guessed that Alicia was sitting behind the tree. He loudly announced that by order of His Highness, Oscar was appointed Alicia's intern. Goosebumps ran over the young girl's body and she guessed that the men were talking about her. She already understood that her stay in this palace would not be peaceful for her. But Oscar was not lost and immediately sternly answered the Emperor's advisor that he did not want to take up this matter, because he had never had to deal with anything like this before. Woken decided to pay a couple of compliments to Oscar, and noted that he had repeatedly witnessed Oscar's brave battle on the front flank in the most difficult battles. Oscar replied that if he knew about it, why was he offering him such a job? But Woken replied that where else could he find such a brave warrior with incredible talents for this task? Alicia listened to this conversation, and mentally placed bets on whether such persuasion by the cunning Emperor's advisor would work on this warrior, or whether all Woken's efforts would be in vain. Oscar thought for a while and said that he agreed to try to complete such a difficult task for himself. Alicia thought to herself that the young man did not have to be persuaded for long, but now Woken said that he thought better and came to the conclusion that such a job really did not suit him, especially since he had never done anything like that before. Oscar was already impatient and said that he was suitable for such a position, but Woken replied that he would have to look for another candidate, which he would do in the near future. Oscar, in all seriousness, told the advisor not to burden himself with the search for a candidate for this position, because in front of him is the best representative among the entire elite. The advisor narrowed his eyes and asked if it was really so. The self-confident vice captain said that he had no doubt about it. Then the advisor smiled and said that, after all, he had decided that he could entrust such work to Oscar, because he had convinced him with his iron arguments. The Emperor's advisor added that starting tomorrow, Oscar should take up this position and be permanently in the Northern Palace, where Princess Ashtad is currently staying. Alicia was just amazed listening to this conversation, how the Emperor's advisor managed to so divorce the vice captain that he himself persuaded him to take that position. Oscar also realized that he had been circled around the nose like an immature teenager, and so he jokingly grabbed Woken's hand and asked if he wanted to die right here today. Alicia heard Woken reply that he had a very busy schedule, so he didn't have a fixed time to die today. About herself, the girl noted that Oscar was probably made to watch over her. She also heard how they exchanged a couple of phrases, and Oscar noted that they would see each other soon. The advisor replied that he was glad to see him and was satisfied with their cooperation. Emperor Fodia was in his office. When Woken walked in on him, Thierry said he thought the counselor would never come back from Oscar. Without looking up from the important documents, Thierry added that he was surprised that the advisor had returned to him alive. Woken replied that he had been absent for only 30 minutes, and the Emperor had already buried him. Then he added that he hoped to go to hell with Princess Ashtad. The Emperor looked at the advisor with such a look as if he wanted to burn him immediately. The Emperor never liked Woken's jokes, and his mood always deteriorated. But the advisor replied that the Emperor would not be angry with him, because he met with Alicia as His Highness wanted. Emperor Fodia noted that he did not ask him to meet with the princess at all, but only gave the order to persuade Oscar to be her personal intern, and was waiting for an explanation from Woken. The counselor was impatient to report what he had seen in the forest, so he immediately told that he saw Princess Ashtad right next to Oscar when he found him today. The advisor added that apparently they had met by chance in the forest and were peacefully talking to each other, lying side by side on the grass. To say that the emperor was shocked by such a message is an understatement. Thierry refused to believe the advisor's words, so he asked him if he was really sure that they were lying side by side on the grass. And a satisfied woken reported that this is exactly how it was. This couple looked like they were blessed by heaven itself. The emperor was already in the mood to look at his important documents. He folded his hands on his chest and said in a voice that he didn't even know they were a couple. The advisor sat down at the edge of the table to the emperor and asked if Thierry was really so interested in Princess Ashtad, because he noticed that His Highness did not pay attention to anyone but the maid since childhood. This was the last straw of the emperor's patience. So he slammed his fist on the table and shouted to the advisor to make sure he had his cap closed when he was going to joke about it. Woken moved to a safe distance, because he knew that jokes with the emperor could end very unpredictably, and asked him to calm down, because he just wanted to give useful advice. The advisor only said that if this young girl interested Thierry, then you need to act immediately and not wait until someone leads this girl under his nose, so as not to regret it later. Lala alone that day. The advisor understood like no one else what a painful topic this was for Thierry. The emperor decided to change the subject of the conversation, and gave his advisor a document, noting that if he had nothing else to do, he should deal with the fire in Khrushchev. The emperor ordered the advisor to go there personally and definitely find those responsible for this crime. He himself wanted to do this business, but at the moment he does not have such an opportunity. In the Khrushchevs, and in addition to burns, traces of serious injuries were found on their bodies, so it was not at all like an accidental fire. It was quite a controversial case in their empire, and Thierry decided to entrust the case personally to his advisor to find out what really happened there. Woken immediately began to familiarize himself with the details of such a difficult and complicated case. The advisor said that the emperor should not worry and that they would definitely deal with everything. Then the counselor took his eyes off the task at hand and told the emperor that Duke Juvern insisted that the emperor find an empress as soon as possible. The emperor leaned back against the wall of his chair and looked intently at his advisor. He was waiting for an explanation about such a bold statement from the duke. The advisor explained that according to the words of the duke, if a worthy woman appears in the heart of the emperor, she will immediately bring order to Thierry's thoughts and feelings, and calm times will come in the empire. The emperor replied that he saw through the duke's true motives, so he had no business with his advice. Thierry then asked the counselor if there was anything else of importance. Woken looked at His Highness and asked if he wanted to hear some special speech from him, or if it just occurred to him. Of course, the advisor perfectly understood what the emperor wanted to hear from him, and noted that he himself closed his mouth when he tried to tell him something about Princess Ashtad. The emperor took his sword in his hands and told the advisor to tell him everything immediately. Woken knew his master's grave nature, so he asked him to lower his weapon before he began his report. The emperor's advisor reported that he was able to research that there were changes in the magical space near the Ashtad kingdom, and although they were slight, he still checked it out. As a result of his research, it turned out that Alicia woke up exactly on the day when these magical fluctuations occurred, although before that she spent 7 years in a complete coma. Woken waited for the emperor's reaction and asked him if he was interested in such information, and if he did not find enough coincidences related to Princess Ashtad. Then the emperor thought that the connection that he so passionately tried to deny was becoming stronger, and he already began to doubt that the princess was only a coincidence. The young girl was sitting in her room without a mood, and thought that she would not have dinner today because she had no appetite at all. The only thing that pleased her was permission to go for walks. She was very tired of meeting new people, and after talking in the forest with Oscar, she had no energy at all, so she lay in her bed all evening. She recalled how she happened to witness a conversation between the counselor and Oscar, and noted that their communication resembled some kind of children's entertainment. Suddenly there was a knock at her door, and she heard the voice of her maid Maria, who asked permission to come in, because she had an urgent message for Her Highness. The young girl continued to lie in bed and quietly told the maid to come in. Then she thought that she must tell Maria that she will not have dinner today. As soon as Maria went inside, she bowed before the princess and informed that His Highness invited her to dine together today. Alicia assumed that this could happen, but did not think that it would happen so quickly. So she got out of bed and asked the maid when exactly she should come for dinner. The maid Maria informed that Alicia should come for dinner right now. The young girl repeated that now, and then it dawned on her that she should be collected immediately. So she was shocked by this. The princess asked how she could be collected right now, and the maid explained that the emperor would be waiting for her in the central palace for dinner in 30 minutes. Alicia smiled and thought to herself that she only had 30 minutes left for the meeting, and thought to herself that Thierry couldn't have warned her about it in advance. They had little time left, and Maria offered her help. Alicia agreed, because she understood that she might not be able to meet such a short deadline to look decent at dinner with the Emperor. A young girl appeared in the dining hall and thanked for the invitation. But the Emperor grunted displeasedly that she could hurry up so as not to make him wait. Alicia thought to herself that she could have warned her about this ahead of time, but decided to keep quiet about it. In general, 30 minutes to pick up a girl is too little. The Emperor told Alicia to sit down at the table, and the young girl did his bidding. Alicia thought that she didn't want to have dinner at all, and she would force herself so as not to upset Thierry. The young girl looked at the handsome man sitting across from her, and she couldn't believe that it was the same kind, sweet prince from her memories of her past life. Only 7 years have passed, and that young man is completely unrecognizable. Her gaze stopped at the unbuttoned shirt, which showed a bunch of muscles. She caught herself thinking that she had never noticed such a thing. Alicia immediately stopped herself from thinking about such things and flashed back to memories of Thierry being a little boy who kept asking her not to leave. The young girl raised her eyes and met the Emperor of Phodia. She realized that it would never be the same again, and she had to be careful not to provoke his anger. After talking with his advisor, the Emperor constantly pondered his words that the princess resembled Thierry, a maid from childhood. No matter how hard he tried not to think about it, he couldn't. Although the young princess interested the Emperor, a lot of coincidences around her did not give him peace. Therefore, he decided to check everything personally before drawing any conclusions. Therefore, the Emperor decided to start with dinner together and called the butler into his room. The butler immediately went into Thierry's room and asked what he wanted. The Emperor asked to call the sous chef of the Imperial Kitchen to his office to discuss the details of tonight's dinner with him. Thierry had special wishes about this. As soon as the Emperor and his guest sat down at the dinner table, the servants began to serve exquisite dishes, and very soon special delicacies appeared on the table. Alicia tried to calm down as much as possible and take control of herself. This was necessary for her in order not to make mistakes that could play a bad joke on her and show her true personality. Since the thoughts did not leave her head, she did not take the cutlery in her hands yet. The Emperor began his meal and told her not to worry because he was not going to eat it today. He noticed that she was all focused and very worried, so he told her that her behavior showed that she was very afraid to be around him. Alicia snapped back to reality and noticed how he was staring at her, so she began to excuse herself and said that she was fine and that she wasn't worried about anything. The Emperor looked at her carefully and sternly asked if she was not afraid of him at all, if she claimed so. I immediately replied to Alice that she was not afraid of the Emperor, and then I thought that she was now very doubtful about this, and that she probably shouldn't be so confident in her answer. The Emperor, after a pause, noted that he had noticed a long time ago that the young girl was completely unknown to fear, judging by her behavior, which he had observed. Alicia was so worried that she had no control over what she was saying, so she decided to remain silent. The strict appearance of the Emperor kept the whole secular society in constant tension and fear. She dared to raise her eyes at him and noticed that he was not looking in her direction. Alicia mentally asked him why he was inviting her to this dinner then. A butler came to the dining room and brought a special salad for Alicia. He announced that the sous chef had tried very hard and prepared this dish personally for the princess. The butler placed the salad in front of Alicia and expressed his hope that Her Highness would like it. Alicia thanked and looked at the plate in front of her, but she was shocked by what she saw, because there were cucumbers in the salad, and as soon as she noticed them, a chill ran down her spine. The young girl could not tolerate cucumbers since her past life, and she understood that everyone who at least somehow crossed paths with her in her past life should know about it. But no matter how much she wanted to, she still couldn't bring herself to eat that piece. So she said that she was very grateful for the sous chef's efforts, but she can't eat cucumbers. Thierry immediately asked why she could not tolerate cucumbers, and this question caused drops of cold sweat to appear on the young girl's forehead. She could feel him staring at her. The Emperor had already forgotten about dinner, folded his hands on his chest and pierced her with his gaze so much that she felt him with every cell in her body. Alicia had nowhere to turn and began to explain that she did not like cucumbers. That was not enough to say. She generally begins to feel nauseous as soon as she eats even a piece of this vegetable. The Emperor seemed to be waiting for such an explanation, so he did not take his eyes off her. Alicia was simply upset that a few minutes ago he could not look at her, but now he was drilling her with his gaze. She felt that heavy look on her, which screamed to everyone around her that I'm a tyrant, and you shouldn't joke with me. After listening to the princess's explanation, the Emperor said that it was necessary to immediately inform the kitchen about her preferences, and told the butler to bring the sous chef to the dining room. The butler said that he would immediately carry out his order and went to the kitchen. Alicia felt quite uncomfortable and did not understand at all why to do this and bother the sous chef about such trifles. She tried to explain to the butler that she can eat absolutely anything except cucumbers. But he did not pay attention to this and went to the kitchen to carry out the emperor's order. The young girl did not understand where the tyrannical emperor had such concern for her, and she guessed that he was definitely up to something. In a minute, the door to the dining room opened and the butler, supporting them, invited the sous chef to enter. Alicia noticed that the sous chef in the imperial palace was a woman. Even from the very threshold, Alicia noticed that the silhouette of this woman was quite familiar to her, and when she entered, Alicia's eyes sparkled with joy. Sous chef greeted the emperor, saying that he greeted His Highness the Emperor, the son of their immense empire. At that time, the emperor did not take his eyes off Princess Ashtad. Alicia looked at the sous chef and couldn't believe her eyes. The female cook asked what the emperor wanted and prepared to listen carefully to all his wishes. Maud was the sous chef of the imperial kitchen. It was Maud who was the young girl's only friend in her past life, when she was in the body of the maid Lala. Despite the changes that had taken place in the woman's appearance over the past 7 years, Alicia, of course, recognized her, and was not surprised that this woman had reached such a position in the palace. Alicia's face simply radiated some indivisible joy, and she couldn't even believe her own eyes. The princess was happy to have a quick meeting with Maud during her stay in the Fia Empire. Alice had so many questions for her old friend that she could hardly resist asking her right here. The emperor asked the princess if she believed in coincidences. This question affected the young girl, as if cold water had been poured over her. She immediately came to her senses, and the whole essence of his question reached her, and she could not find an answer. The emperor, not taking his eyes off Princess Ashtad, said that all the coincidences that have happened in his life until today are just the result of staging by other people. His eyes glowed some horrible red color that made Alicia's heart beat faster, and he asked if there really were true coincidences in life. Alicia just looked at him and was silent. Thierry then added that from today they would have dinner together every day. Alicia didn't know how to invent a reason to refuse and said that he was quite a busy person and it would be inconvenient. But he seemed not to listen to her explanation. The emperor said that she should not be late for dinner. She should live in his palace and called the butler to prepare for her a room on the same floor as his bedroom. Dvoretsky said that everything will be done in the best way. The emperor saw the young girl's embarrassment and watched her reaction. That she was shocked is an understatement. Alicia worried that not only would they have dinner together every night, but they would also live very close to each other. They promised to prepare the room for tomorrow. Alicia was stunned by the fact that events were developing so quickly and was frightened by the emperor's interest in her. Already in her room late at night, Alicia pondered why the emperor had changed so much in his behavior towards her and began to talk to her in some riddles. The worried maid Maria saw that something was bothering her mistress and asked if everything was fine with her. Alicia was distracted from her thoughts and looked at the maid. Only now did she realize that the maid had not yet left, and that she was not alone. Therefore, she replied to Maria that everything is fine with her, and said that she can be free. But Maria apologized for boring her with her stories, and added that she should tell her about their emperor's childhood. Alice to hear such a thing from the maid, so I asked in surprise whether the maid was really going to tell her about Tira's childhood. Maid Maria informed them that it was strictly forbidden for them to mention this subject, but she believed that Princess Ashtad should know about it, so she decided to tell about the emperor's childhood. Alicia was surprised by the courage of her maid, and said that she would gladly listen to the stories of the emperor's childhood, and asked if the maid was not taking a risk by talking about it. Maria trembled with fear, and said that she would hope for the favor of Her Highness. That is why she decided on such a risky act. The young girl saw with what efforts the maid was trying to start this conversation, so she thanked her for such a bold step. Alicia assured that their conversation will definitely remain a secret, so the maid Maria cannot worry about the fact that the topic of conversation will go beyond this room. The princess invited the maid to sit down and talk while sitting, because this is a very important conversation and they should speak more freely on this topic. The maid thanked her and sat down opposite Alicia. When the maid sat down opposite the princess, she began her conversation with the fact that in her childhood, the emperor was looked after by a maid. Alicia was surprised that the story started with this very topic. Of course, the girl was grateful to the maid for daring to have this conversation, because she was extremely interested to know what was happening during the time that she was absent in this palace. Maria reported that the emperor spent his entire childhood at the villa in complete solitude, and that maid was the only one with whom he shared all his joys and pleasant moments in life. The maid then continued that after one accident, Emperor Phodia became completely fixated on that maid. This caused surprise in Alicia, because she did not understand in what sense he was stuck and what the maid meant by the words accident, because she was killed then. The maid reported that after awakening the Emperor's fiery power, some of the aristocrats tried to get close to him using his fixation on that maid. Maria added that Thierry simply hated the whole secular society for those ridiculous attempts, and Alice became curious about what exactly the aristocrats had done in order to take advantage of the Emperor. His Highness had awakened such a strong power of fire that even the imperial family did not know its exact boundaries. The Emperor did not tolerate mistakes. An enormous power was concentrated in his hands. Aristocrats tried to grab hold of a thread and somehow influence such a strong emperor, so a fateful decision came to their heads. Aristocrats began to find young girls who were very similar to Lala's maid, and sent them to the emperor's palace to serve him, and if possible, get close to him. The maid said that the aristocrats thought it could not end in anything bad, and hoped that it would somehow soften the cruel heart of the tyrannical emperor. Despite all these hopes, nothing worked, and everyone involved in this idea was killed by the enraged emperor himself. Although Alicia felt sorry for those innocent girls, she still couldn't understand what the aristocrats were counting on when they came up with such a ridiculous plan. It was after this that rumors spread throughout the empire that the relationship between the emperor and the maid was so terrible that he could not even bear her name being mentioned. Now the young girl understood why the maids, who were discussing stories from the emperor's childhood, did not dare to speak the name of his maid. Maria said that she understands that she is crossing all kinds of boundaries, but she is very worried that the emperor may vent his anger on the princess, as it happened with those aristocrats. Alicia noticed that the maid was very worried, and she wanted to believe that she sincerely wanted to help the princess by telling such secrets about his highness. Therefore, the young girl told Maria not to worry, because she did not come to this palace of her own free will, but was taken as a hostage from the kingdom of Ashtad. But she saw that the maid was worried about something else. And then Alicia assumed that it was because she managed to bond with that wolf, and she asked if that was what the maid was worried about. Maria timidly raised her eyes and said that before this incident, no one had even managed to get close to the wolf, and from the first day the princess could pet him freely, and he allowed her to do it. It was a complete shock to everyone in the imperial palace that there was now one more person, besides the emperor, to whom that disobedient wolf obeyed. Fortunately, or unfortunately, Her Highness remembered the name of that wolf in the presence of the emperor, and this was a very big mistake. After all, everyone who knew the name of that wolf was like an apple in the emperor's eye, and he mercilessly dealt with all of them. Therefore, there were no witnesses left who actually knew the wolf's name. This, of course, was not what Alicia expected to hear, so she thought that if it was really true, then Maria had every reason to worry about her own safety and the safety of her mistress. Now it dawned on Alice why the emperor did not take his eyes off her so intently when she was stroking the wolf, because of course she reminded him of Lali. Alicia asked if that was why he was talking. Maria bowed her head guiltily and said that she did not know what the emperor was really thinking about, but believed that this was the reason. Then Maria added that she considered Princess Ashtad to be an exception for Emperor Phodia, because he behaved differently with her than with all those who reminded him of Lali. Maria said that she doesn't know what the real reason is, but she knows 100% that the princess is special, because otherwise he would have gotten even with her a long time ago. Alicia thought about the real reason for this attitude towards her, and she thought that maybe he wanted to make sure of something, and maybe thanks to her he could influence the decisions of the kingdom. Early in the morning, the maid came to Alicia's room and informed her that it had been raining all night, and it has not stopped to this day. Alicia was upset and said that now they won't be able to go for a walk. Maria apologized for giving the princess extra trouble with yesterday's conversation, and Alicia replied that her bad mood was related to the gloomy weather, not the conversation. The maid came up with a brilliant idea that they could visit the royal library, because she had heard that it contained an extremely large number of interesting books. Alicia liked this idea, and said that after breakfast they would definitely get together and visit the library. The young girl hoped to find some clues there. When they finally got to the library, Alicia was in awe of its grandeur. She told the maid about this, and Maria replied that the library was enlarged during the reconstruction. Alicia asked what the reconstruction was connected with, and the maid told that after the emperor ascended the throne, part of the palace was destroyed and therefore it had to be rebuilt. Alicia asked if books had been added to the library since then. Maria reported that the fire spread only to the 3rd floor, and nothing was damaged on the floor where the library was located. Alicia's time in the imperial palace, she wanted to know more details about the period she was away from it. Therefore, she took this opportunity and decided to look for answers to her questions in such a huge library of the imperial palace. She was interested in the question of where the great power of the imperial family came from, which helps them stay on the imperial throne for many centuries, and whether it has an end. Alicia finally managed to find one of the history books where she hoped to find answers to her questions. But suddenly she heard a man's voice addressing her. The surprised girl tore her eyes from the book and looked at the man who was next to her. She did not even feel how he approached, and she was interested in the question of whether he had been standing here for a long time. The tall man noticed that he scared the girl with his unexpected question, so he apologized for it and said that he did not do it on purpose. The man introduced himself. It was Eden Riet. Alicia immediately realized that she had already heard this name somewhere and tried to remember where exactly. Of course, the name was familiar to her, but she couldn't remember where exactly she had heard it. Alicia also introduced herself in the reply and said that she came from the kingdom of Ashtad. The young man smiled and said that it was a great honor for him to meet the princess in person. Therefore, when he saw her in the library, he decided to take advantage of this opportunity. Alicia knew the rules of etiquette and answered that it was also a great honor for her to meet Riat. Alicia then thought that this was a rather formal style of communication. She still had this from the former Lala, and she could not get used to the fact that she now holds the status of princess of the kingdom of Ashtad. So she congratulated herself by addressing the knight Eden. At that moment, the young man shyly turned his head away and a red blush appeared on his face. He guiltily informed that he had not been knighted. Riyadh then asked that the princess address him simply by his first name, and Alicia happily agreed to address her new acquaintance that way. The young man thanked for understanding and paid attention to the book that was held in the hands of Her Highness. He asked her what book she had chosen to read, although Riyadh already understood by the cover which book the princess was holding, and asked why she was interested in the history of their empire. The young girl decided that it is not worth starting a new acquaintance with a frank conversation, so they said that just this book caught her eye and she decided to take it to read. Riyadh smiled back. Meanwhile, Alicia thought that a rather strange atmosphere had been created during their conversation, and she would like to be left alone. Then the young man began to make excuses that he had gathered courage and decided to speak to the princess first, although he had never done this before. Alicia looked at the young man more carefully and noticed how difficult it was for him to talk about it. So she noticed about herself that he was quite shy. Then the young man asked how she felt after such a long journey, because he knew that getting to their empire was quite difficult. Alicia thanked you for your concern and said that she was fine, so there was no need to worry about her well-being. The young man didn't even know how to continue the conversation, so he turned his head away, scratched the back of his head and began to say something incomprehensible, not daring to start a new topic. Rieth then turned his head away and apologized for disturbing her solitude, saying that he should take care of her personal space in this library. The young man said at the end that he would be glad to see Alicia again and would wait for such an opportunity. And then, without looking her in the eyes, he turned away and walked away. Alicia had never met such a shy man, so she started repeating his name to herself to learn more about him. Then she looked out from behind the bookcase. Alicia looked at the back of the young man who was walking away from her for a few more minutes and thought that he was quite strange, although there was something about him that seemed quite familiar to her. As soon as Eden left, the young girl immediately sat down at the table and began to research the history of the empire. She was interested in the smallest detail about the formation of firepower. The founding of the history of the empire seemed like a fairy tale to the young girl. When hundreds of states were engulfed in bloody wars, an immortal creature appeared and fell in love with a man. That creature was very worried about the man, worried about his survival and helped him cope with all the troubles in order to remain unharmed in this bloody world. The Fia Empire was born. Turning another page of the history book, Alicia thought to herself that it never occurred to her that someone might catch her reading historical literature. Now it became clear to Alicia that it was the man and that divine being who became the progenitors of the imperial family with the gift of fire. Also analyzing everything that the young girl managed to learn from the history book, she came to the conclusion that it was because of this union that the power of fire was extremely unique. The only question remained: why the immortal mythical creature died first, then the man himself? And not a word was mentioned about this in the history of the empire. The next day, when they were having dinner together, the emperor informed the young girl that very soon there would be a hunting tournament, and Alicia should also take part in it. The young girl's mouth opened in surprise. She did not even notice how she began to look at the emperor with huge eyes of surprise. She understood that her participation was already decided. Then Thierry asked if she knew how to ride a horse, and Alicia answered that she spent quite a long time in bed, so she was completely weaned from an active way of doing things. The emperor answered briefly that she would then take part in her too. Alicia cautiously asked if young girls get on a horse at a hunting tournament. As far as she knew, females only watched hunting races. The emperor replied that this was complete nonsense and that she was old-fashioned in her vision. Thierry expressed hope that she will manage to survive, and he does not expect that she is hunting something there. Alicia, his disbelief in her, drove him mad, so she said she would ask Oscar to teach her to ride. But the emperor smiled and said that he would personally teach her to ride horses. And tomorrow they will start their lessons right after breakfast. Alicia, of course, wanted to bang her fist on the table and say that she was not going to do such a thing. But all she had to do was bow her head and agree with His Highness's decision. If Alicia had known that everything would turn out like this, she would have immediately refused, and there was no way back for her. So the next morning, dressed in her riding clothes, she was ready for her lessons. Alice, I asked Maria what the rules of this hunting tournament were. The maid said that the essence of the tournament is that whoever hunts the most prey before sunset will be the winner. For the first place, they promised many precious jewels and a rather substantial monetary reward. But if the winner wants, he can give up his place to someone else. Alicia thought about the rules of the tournament and the promised reward, and told the maid Maria that this is a pretty good motivation for all the participants of the hunting tournament. As for giving up your prize, it was more like showing your loyalty. This was often practiced between lovers of aristocratic society. Maria said that all the representatives of the aristocrats will gather there, especially since last year the season of debutantes was cancelled due to the war with the Kingdom of Takal. And this year there was a good opportunity to make up for what was lost for a debutante from the entire empire. Maria then asked if Alicia had ever debuted in a hunting tournament. Princess Ashtad replied that, unfortunately, she did not have time to make her debut, as she was in a coma during the year of her debut, so there was no official debut for Alice yet. The princess told her maids that they already had to go to the riding lesson and moved forward. On her way, she was met by Oscar, who greeted the young girl and said that he had heard the latest news that Alicia would be learning to ride today. Alicia replied that all these news are true and she is in a hurry to study. The young girl knew that according to the plot of the novel, it was at this tournament of debutantes that the main character would appear. Walking towards the exit, Alicia thought about what would happen when Tyr met the main character at the hunting tournament, and how reality would change after that. On the road, as if out of nowhere, the Emperor Photia appeared, who told Alicia that judging by her appearance and mood, she seemed to be preparing for war. Her Highness immediately bowed her head and said that she was pleased to welcome Emperor Photia of the Sun of this empire. And before she had time to finish, the Emperor turned and went to the exit. Shocked, Alicia looked at the young man's back and thought that what was the point of starting a conversation with her first, and walking away without hearing an answer. Alicia understood with her mind that this was no longer the little Tyr she knew before, but her heart continued to search for the kindness and sincerity of the little prince in this tyrant. Offended, Alicia looked at the back of Emperor Photia, who was walking towards the exit, and thought that he had forgotten how they held hands and made promises to each other not long ago. Alicia then pulled herself together and told her heart to realize once and for all that that past tiara no longer existed, and therefore she had to get used to such a harsh reality. The Emperor turned and saw that the confused princess was standing in the middle of the corridor, so he told her that while she was standing here, the sun would set and they would not have time to do anything. Alicia thought that she shouldn't expect something from this tyrant and then get upset for nothing. And even if there is kindness left in his heart, he will definitely not show it to her. Therefore, the young girl took herself in her hands and followed the Emperor, who was quickly heading to the stables. When they got closer, she saw a huge black horse. Approaching the horse, Alicia even retreated from such a sight. She asked the Emperor if this animal was too big for her, because she did not even dare to approach him. Oscar hurried to the young girl with his explanations and told Alicia that this is His Highness's favorite horse, which they all jokingly call the Kid. Oscar also added that the Emperor did not give a nickname to his beloved horse, so they called him that themselves, and this name stuck with the animal for quite a long time. The vice captain looked at Alicia and said that the same story happened with this horse as with the wolf, which has also been living in the Empire without a name for a long time. The Emperor could not stand Oscar's babbling, turned sharply and sternly told the young man to stop flapping his stupid tongue, and immediately follow them to study. Tyr's eyes at that time burned with such a red, fierce flame that even Alicia was frightened by it. The vice captain straightened up in front of the Emperor and reported that he would carry out his order. Alicia felt sorry for the vice captain, who after such a remark of the Emperor did not know where the children were, and she thought that he should not have joked so much about Tyr's favorite animals. And the young girl herself had to wait for the Emperor's orders for a short time, and he turned to her and told her to come closer to the horse and start climbing on it. Confused, Alicia looked at this huge animal and did not even know which way to approach. She did not even expect that their training would immediately begin with the practical part. The Emperor gave the young girl a disdainful look and asked why she was standing there and whether she had changed her mind about riding. Alicia saw that the Emperor expected from her that she would be afraid and would not take part in the hunting tournament, so she decided that his hopes would not come true and went to the horse. But as soon as she came close to the Emperor, he immediately took her by the waist, and in a second she was riding a horse. She did not even have time to blink an eye. Alicia didn't know how to react to this, and was surprised at how easily Thierry lifted her and placed her on top of the animal. She didn't even know that her little prince had developed so much strength over the years. But she did not have time to consider how strong the Emperor of Phodia had become, as after a second he deftly mounted his horse and sat down behind the princess. The princess shyly looked at the Emperor and did not know how to react to the fact that they were so close. Of course, she did not expect that their classes would go like this. But this tyrant immediately brought her back to reality, and made a remark about the fact that she was placing her feet incorrectly while riding and showed her how to do it. Before the horse took a couple of steps, Alicia received a lot of comments that she had crossed the wrong leg, held the bridle incorrectly, held her back incorrectly, and it seemed that there would be no end to it. But as soon as the young girl fulfilled all the Emperor's remarks and they were already moving slowly along the forest road, the Emperor asked her if he would fulfill her wishes. Then she should ask. To Alicia, I thought that he wanted to test her somehow and was embarrassed by such an unexpected question. So I remained silent and did not know what to answer. After considering everything, Alicia told the Emperor that she would like him to allow her to correspond with her family, who remained in the kingdom of Ashtad. The surprised Emperor looked at the young girl and asked her if this was all she wanted to ask of him, because he promised to fulfill any of her wishes. Alicia looked at the Emperor and it was clear on his face that he was upset because he was probably expecting something more substantial. So she said that was all she wanted. The young girl added that it would be enough for her to send letters to her relatives a couple of times a month, and she would find out exactly how they live there. The princess told the Emperor that she just wanted to write that she was all right, and was being treated well here so that they would not worry about their younger princess. After all, their youngest daughter was in a deep coma for 7 years, and as soon as she woke up, she immediately became a hostage in another empire. She was sure that they were waiting for some news from her. Although Alicia did not have time to spend more time with her family, she was 100% sure that the princess was loved there, despite her character. After listening to the young girl, the Emperor said that if she really wanted it, he would allow her to send letters to her relatives twice a month. The young girl saw how the expression of the Emperor's face changed and noticed a drop of some humanity in his eyes. The princess understood that the young man was moved by her wish. The Emperor got off his horse, looked at the young girl and said that in exchange for fulfilling her wish, she must show a good result in the hunting tournament. Of course, the young girl's eyes widened in surprise, and she asked if he was counting on her to catch some prey in this tournament. And Thierry, smiling, said that she understood everything correctly, and if she wants to get her wish, she must prove to him that she deserves it. The Emperor waited for an answer and asked her if her confidence in her abilities had diminished. Alicia, of course, expected that the wish would not be fulfilled just like that, so she firmly said that they had agreed. The young girl looked at the Emperor with confident eyes and said that she would try to catch some prey, but mentally noted that she still had nothing to lose. The Emperor did not expect that Alicia would agree to such conditions, and could not understand a girl who, for the sake of such an insignificant desire, could step over her fears. Then Thierry looked at her, smiled and said that he was already anticipating her debut at the hunting tournament, because he was sure that everyone would have something to see. The Emperor then added that they should begin their training right now if she wanted to learn anything. Alicia asked in surprise what kind of training it was about. The Emperor helped the young girl dismount from the horse, and asked how she was going to hunt in a hunting tournament if she did not understand the seriousness of such an event. When they were very close, he told her not to worry because he would help her with her studies. At that moment, Alicia remembered the words of Maria, who said that the princess was an exception for the Emperor. Meanwhile, in one of the rooms of the imperial palace, the woman appeared before Maria and ordered her to immediately tell about the princess everything she managed to find out. The frightened maid did not even dare to look up at this woman, so she looked at the floor and considered what she should really say now. That woman demanded that Maria tell everything immediately. Therefore, the maid said that Alicia dines with the Emperor and takes riding lessons from him, but there is nothing special. But then the maid quickly added that Princess Ashtad showed no interest in Emperor Phodia. Of course, Maria did not want to say too much to these women, But one of them grabbed the confused maid by the hair and threw her to the floor. She cried out in displeasure that she had not been placed next to the princess to be just furniture. The woman reminded that Maria's function is to do everything possible and impossible, so that Princess Ashtad disappears from the emperor's life once and for all. Maria had tears in her eyes from the pain, and she tried to justify herself and explain to these angry women that she does everything that depends on her. And the princess is too beautiful. After these words, the woman slapped the poor maid so hard that she flew several meters and fell to the floor. The woman approached Maria, who couldn't even get up after such a blow from the floor, and told her that she was just a fool, and that it was obvious the head maid had overestimated her abilities. The woman had a kind of beastly smile on her face, and she let out through her teeth that if Maria did not fulfill her order, she would immediately lose her job and never find a place to live again. The elder Countess Auntie, who was sitting on a chair and watched how the maid Maria was abused by this woman, calmly told Cyril to calm down and get a hold of herself. Auntie remarked that the appearance of maidservants was of particular importance in the imperial palace, so they could not tarnish their reputation in such a reckless manner. Sybil approached Auntie and began to shower her with compliments about what a far-sighted and intelligent woman she is, who can think things through a few steps ahead. Auntie said to give the order to Maria. Sybil returned to Maria and said that she was ordered to get Princess Ashtad into the forest maze at any cost at the tournament. They hope that she will cope with this task. The maid, Mary, raised her tearful eyes at these women and thought that the forest labyrinth was too dangerous, and that the princess could end up very badly if she got there. Then the Cyrilha took out the whip and gave a predatory smile. She ominously told the young maid that now was the time to move on to punishment, and she hoped it would be a good lesson for her. Poor Maria begged her not to whip her, because she already knew firsthand how unbearable the pain was. But she was inexorable, and only sternly ordered her to lift her skirt. On the day of the tournament, the weather turned out to be exceptionally good, and the princess told her maid that they were lucky at least with that. The maid finished helping the princess dress and said that everything was ready. Alicia noticed that today the maid did not look like usual, and she was also extremely worried about something, so she asked her if she was sick, because she noticed that Maria was limping. The maid shuddered at this question and quickly began to make excuses that she just accidentally sprained her leg today, which is why it hurts a little to walk. Alicia said that in that case, Oscar would accompany her from now on, and she would immediately send her maid to the doctor to examine her and provide first aid. Alicia noticed that the maid was behaving rather strangely, even though before this caution was one of her best qualities as a maid. But today Maria was very frightened by something. Of Sybil, who said that she was counting on her, sounded in Maria's head at that time. But the maid could not decide on this vile act, because Alicia had always been kind to her. But then she remembered how they had whipped her in that room and threatened to do it again if she did not obey the order. And then the maid dared to take this mean step. In her mind, Maria immediately apologized to the princess who had treated her so well and asked Alice aloud if she had heard of the forest maze. Surprised, Alicia asked what she meant. Maria reported that in the forest labyrinth there is an extremely beautiful villa, which is hidden from prying eyes and is located on the north side of the palace, where a mysterious atmosphere prevails. The road to that villa is quite confusing, so almost no one can find it, and she has heard a lot of talk that all worries cease to matter in that villa. The maid also added that if Princess Ashtad wished, she could find her. Alicia noticed that Maria was talking about the villa where she spent her entire childhood with Thierry. And although the rumors are quite exaggerated, that villa is really very difficult to find in the middle of a dense forest, in which all the roads are so tangled that not everyone can find a way back. At that moment, the young girl thought why the maid Maria was telling her about that mysterious villa, and guessed that there was clearly something wrong with it. But Alicia replied that she would definitely visit there. The young princess thought to herself that she had spent a long enough time there that she could easily avoid the danger and calmly get there and back. Therefore, I thanked Maria for the information. The princess noticed that the maid Maria began to tremble like an autumn leaf, and understood that there must be some serious reasons for this. Meanwhile, Maria turned to the princess. Maria began to say that she was asking for forgiveness, but she had to say, and she did not have time to finish her sentence, when Oscar approached the girls and greeted Her Highness. Then the vice-captain told that soon the Emperor of Phodia himself should arrive at the hunting tournament, and they should meet him together with all the guests of this event. Oscar added that the aristocrats had also all gathered. Alicia came out of the tent and said that Oscar might not accompany her, but the vice-captain reminded that he was responsible for her safety. When Oscar caught up with Alicia, who was quickly walking forward, he added that he could not leave her alone in this terrarium, which consists of aristocrats, so he would be next to her. It was the first social event in this empire for quite a long time, and Alicia understood that all eyes would be focused on the stranger who had recently been brought from the kingdom of Ashtad. Alicia said to herself that she should not forget that she is only a hostage, and then she thought about the real reasons why the emperor forced her to participate in this tournament. When Alicia and the vice-captain came closer to the crowd, a clear step was heard and Oscar leaned closer to the princess, saying that only the emperor steps like that. It was immediately announced that His Majesty was now illuminating everyone with his presence, and immediately after that, the emperor himself appeared accompanied by his closest guards. When the emperor took his honorary throne, he announced that it had been a long time since official events had been held in their empire, so he knew with what impatience everyone was waiting for the opening of the tournament. Emperor Fodia also loudly added that he hopes that each of the participants in this hunting tournament will please everyone with decent hunting results. Alicia kept her eyes on the emperor from the crowd and noted that he was very suited to the role of emperor, and then their eyes met for a moment. After a second, the emperor turned his head away from Alice and looked in the other direction. He announced that if everyone is ready, then they can go to the venue of the tournament. Alicia kept her eyes on the emperor and was irritated that he had turned his gaze away from her so quickly, although of course she hoped for something else. The outraged young girl also turned away from the emperor and decided to go to the venue of the tournament. But Alicia did not notice how she caught another young girl on the shoulder. Then they looked at each other, and the young girl with pink hair apologized for not noticing Alicia. The princess looked at this girl, because she seemed quite familiar to her. Alicia greeted the girl and said that there was nothing wrong. And then she paid attention to her hair, and it occurred to her that she had already seen it. One of the women called this young woman, calling her Lady Ryath, and then it came to Alicia where she could already see this hair color. Only now did Alicia realize that the main character of the novel was in front of her, and she admired this color when she saw it in the illustrations of her favorite book. When Lady Ryath approached the other representatives of the aristocracy, they began to ask if she was taking part in the debutante tournament this year. The women who gathered around Lady Ryath showered her with compliments, telling her how beautiful she looked, how sweet she smiled, what a pleasant appearance she had. Of course, Alicia expected that Lady Ryath would appear in the emperor's life sooner or later, but she still hoped that it would not be so soon. The main character of the novel, One Dream, is Lady Ryath. According to the plot, she was supposed to be the chosen one of the emperor, because more than one man in this empire could not resist her beauty. Alicia noticed that the aura of this young girl reminded her very much of the aura of a young man whom she happened to meet in the library. And now she realized that it was the Marquis of Riyadh. Even then, he seemed quite strange to her, and she immediately felt something was wrong. But what exactly she understood only during the hunting tournament. The princess was deep in thought, reflecting on the recent meeting in the library, and was angry with the Marquis for not mentioning his aristocratic status. She had heard that a lot of aristocrats were visiting their palace because of the hunting tournament that was to be held soon. But she had no idea that it was this Marquis that she would have to meet. Fodia approached her, and only after he greeted Her Highness, she looked up at him. The emperor grumpily said that she was flying somewhere in the clouds again, and could not concentrate on the hunting tournament. Alicia wanted to know how long ago the emperor had approached them. The young girl said that she was just thinking about hunting tactics, and that's why she was so focused. She thought to herself that she had to get out of here. But before the princess had time to take a couple of steps, the emperor told her to stop and put his hand blocking her path. Alicia just froze and kept her eyes on Thierry. The emperor leaned over the young girl quite close and asked where she was going. Alicia thought that his behavior crossed all permissible boundaries. The princess smiled at how well she managed in such a tense situation, and asked the emperor if something was wrong. She was already begging God to let her go because she felt quite uncomfortable. The emperor sternly asked how she was going to go hunting when she didn't even take a weapon with her, such as a sword. The girl explained that she would come up with something. Thierry also added that he did not have time to give her permission to use a bow during hunting. Alicia thought that in her past life she was always catching some kind of animals, but the emperor muttered displeasedly that the princess didn't even have a plan of action, and how could she expect to show good results at the hunting tournament in such a case? Then Thierry crawled over and pulled out a small sword. He looked into her eyes and held out the weapon to Alicia. Thierry noted that the sword is quite light, and therefore the princess should be comfortable handling it. Emperor Fodia added that she should be careful not to cut herself with this sword. Alicia answered Thierry that she is not so clumsy that she will not be able to help herself and handle weapons. Suddenly, a bugle sounded, announcing the start of the tournament. All the guests and participants of the tournament hurried to take their seats. The emperor said that everything had begun. Alicia told Thierry that she had to go and thanked the emperor for such a valuable gift. Finally, the emperor told Alicia that if she did not feel well enough, she should immediately return back. In his eyes, the princess felt sincere concern for her health. After a minute, he turned away and told her over his shoulder to avoid injuries and not cause him unnecessary trouble. The girl noted that he is, as usual, in his repertoire. Every time he and Thierry had dinner together, he secretly watched her. But when their eyes crossed, the emperor immediately looked away. Alicia looked at the back of the emperor, who was moving further and further away from her, and wondered if all his words and actions were a real concern for her, or just some solid check. Alicia approached Oscar, who was already waiting for her, and brought her horse. The vice captain asked if the girl would be able to get on him by herself, and the princess answered that of course she could. The princess said that now would be a good opportunity for her to show off all the riding skills she had learned during their joint lessons with and Emperor Fodia. Then suddenly the young girl heard someone calling her. Alicia thought for a moment and realized that this voice was quite familiar. When Alicia turned her head, she saw that her maid Maria was rushing towards her at full speed. She shouted for her highness to wait for her because she had an urgent message. Alicia looked at her maid and immediately realized that something extremely serious had happened. Meanwhile, the maid grabbed her landlady's hand and began to pull her away from Oscar. On the way, she said that she had an urgent message to tell her before the hunting tournament began. The vice captain, meanwhile, warned the girls not to stray too far. When Alicia and her maid walked away from Oscar, Alicia asked Maria why she came running here before the tournament started, since she had recently sprained her leg. The maid began to tell Alicia that under no circumstances should she go to the forest labyrinth, which Maria had recently told her about, describing this amazing place. The maid added that the villa had been abandoned for quite some time and one wrong turn could lead her into a trap. Recently, only wild animals live there. Then Maria cried and asked Alice for forgiveness for trying so hard to lure the young girl to that villa, although she added that she had no forgiveness. The maid grabbed the princess by the hands and with tears in her eyes begged Alicia not to go to that forest under any circumstances. And for this, the maid was ready to suffer any punishment. Tearful Maria was waiting for her landlady's answer, and Alicia, after thinking a little, promised her that she would not go to that forest. Then the princess asked what kind of punishment she was talking about, and waiting for her maid's answer, she thought that some third person was involved in this case. The maid bowed her head and said guiltily that after the hunting tournament, she would definitely tell Alicia about everything, because it was a long and complicated story. The princess realized that someone was forcing the maid to tell her about the forest labyrinth, and the girl admitted her mistake and repented. Alicia finally said goodbye to Maria and went to Oscar. Oscar, who watched this situation from the sidelines, asked Alicia what happened, because he noticed that the maid was in a hurry to tell her something. Alicia replied that it was nothing serious. When Alicia was riding a horse on the road past a crowd of onlookers, someone from the crowd noticed that the vice captain was sitting next to her and asked the neighbor if Verlick was really riding there. The men recognized the vice captain and were more interested in the young woman who was driving next to them, and they began to wonder what kind of beauty had decided to take part in the hunting tournament. One of them took a closer look at Alicia and told his friend that he was seeing such a beautiful woman for the first time, so they must say hello to her in person. A few minutes later, the man jumped on his horse and went to catch up with the vice captain and his companion. As soon as their horses were at the same distance, the man turned to them. First, the man greeted Oscar and told him that they had not seen each other for a long time. Alicia then realized that these men must be acquaintances. She wondered who drove up to them, but Oscar only pursed his lips and did not answer the stranger. He smiled, telling Alice that apparently Mr. Verlick did not want to greet him, and asked the lady if he could find out her name. The man himself also introduced himself to Alicia, saying that he was Andrea, the eldest son of the Marquis of Cadio. The princess replied that her name was Alicia, and she came to them from the kingdom of Ashtad. The Marquis's eyes almost popped out of his forehead. He repeated once again whether she was really Princess Ashtad, whom the emperor had brought to his palace. The man could not believe his ears. Then Andrew's eyebrows furrowed, and he displeasedly said that he did not expect that the prisoners could take part in such events for the aristocratic society. He added that he did not expect such leniency from the emperor. Alicia just smiled in response. She expected such a reaction, but did not think that it would be so unpleasant. Oscar decided to stand up for the young girl and, turning to the Marquis, said that he also did not expect that the emperor would allow such scum like him to participate in the hunting tournament. The Marquis asked if the moose had heard what Oscar had just said, and Oscar said that indeed their emperor is very lenient if he allows such scum to participate. Andrea shouted how Oscar allows himself such statements in his direction, And the vice captain, in turn, replied that his family would not pull the Marquis out of the next mess every time. It was the last straw, and Andrea could not stand her patience. He immediately drew his sword and charged at Oscar. The vice captain quickly exposed his weapon and repelled the attacker's attack. Alicia was not jokingly scared and did not even know what to do and who to call for help. Suddenly, a loud male shout was heard, telling them to stop. The Emperor personally approached the young people, accompanied by his bodyguards. Disgruntled, Thierry asked the men what the hell was going on here. When the Emperor came closer, he sternly asked what these gentlemen were allowing themselves, and did they decide to arrange some silly showdowns instead of hunting. Alicia breathed a sigh of relief at that moment. She was very grateful to the Emperor that he drove up to them just in time, and this fight did not end irreparably. At that moment, it occurred to the young girl why Thierry is always so punctual. It seemed as if he was constantly watching her from the sidelines. At the same time, someone kept a close eye on the lawn where the Emperor and other representatives of the aristocracy had gathered and took out his bow. The man carefully inserted an arrow into him. At such a great distance, the Emperor heard the rustling of a branch and understood that an attempt was being made on one of them. But most of all, he worried not about his own life, but about the life of the princess. The stranger in the bushes drew his bow and took aim. A second later, he fired an arrow that flew towards the clearing at top speed. The Emperor shouted to Alicia to go to him immediately and held out his hand to her. Alicia was frightened and did not understand why he so unexpectedly began to care about her life. Thierry already saw the arrow flying towards Alicia and feared for her life. The young girl looked into the Emperor's eyes and did not understand what was happening. She saw that some horror appeared in his red eyes, and at first she did not understand that it was fear for her life. He shouted for the princess to be careful, and it was already too late. The arrow hit the horse on which Alicia was sitting, and the animal reared up. The frightened girl barely had time to grab the bridle and keep her balance so as not to fall off the animal. The wounded horse did not listen to anyone and immediately ran along the forest path. Alicia, who was sitting on a horse, barely held on so as not to fly off it. Thierry immediately ran after Alicia, trying to catch up with her. The young girl did not understand at all what was happening, and only her heart, which was beating at a frantic speed, told her that it would not end in anything good. Thierry shouted for her to stop. At the race, he ordered Oscar to gather all the knights and immediately overtake him in the forest. The vice captain shouted that he understood everything and rushed to collect the knights for the task. Alicia's enraged horse raced at such a speed that the Emperor could not catch up with him. Thierry already regretted 100 times that he allowed Alicia to participate in this damn tournament. Watching the horse with the princess move further and further away from the Emperor, he again saw his maid Lali, who was also leaving him and moving away. He repeatedly asked himself why Alicia always reminded him of Lala. But for now, it didn't matter. Because he didn't want to lose the princess now, like he didn't want to lose the maid in his distant childhood, Alicia's horse. But what he saw upset him very much. The princess's horse lay dead on the ground in a pool of blood, and his whole body was completely mangled. The Emperor immediately understood that some predatory animals could have torn the horse's body in such a way, and he immediately wondered where the princess had disappeared. He refused to believe that the same fate befell her. Some extraneous sound distracted the Emperor from his thoughts, and when he raised his eyes, he saw that a huge wolf was coming towards him. Thierry now understood who so cruelly dealt with Alicia's horse. The animal began to growl viciously and prepared to attack the Emperor. The wolf opened its mouth and bent down on the young man. In the red eyes of Emperor Phodia, some devilish, terrifying lights immediately appeared, and he took out his sword. The man had an opportunity to get even with the monster for the princess. With one blow, the Emperor sent the terrible monster to hell and stood in the middle of the clearing with a bloody sword. The question remained where his Alicia is now. At that moment, it occurred to him that perhaps this wolf had attacked the young girl as well as the horse, and his heart refused to accept such a terrible reality. The Emperor looked around the area and saw that there was no trace of the princess. Therefore, he decided that Alicia managed to escape from here and went in search of her further into the thick of the forest. Step by step, the Emperor made his way deeper into the forest bushes and reassured himself with the thought that everything must be fine with the princess, and she remained alive and unharmed. Then the young man's eyes came upon a large cleft in an old tree. He knew that he was hiding there and therefore felt in his heart that his princess should be right here. He remembered that once upon a time when he was a child, it was from Lala's maid that they found this secret place, and for the first time she treated him to something very tasty. It was then that Thierry tasted peaches for the first time in his life, and he and his maid decided to make this place their secret refuge and come here for picnics. The emperor decided that she just had to be right here, although he knew that no one but him and Lali could know about this place. So he decided to go inside. Taking the first step, he immediately realized that if she was here, he would have no doubt that she and his Lali were closely related in some strange way. The emperor loudly shouted Alicia's name when he entered the cave, and at that moment it didn't matter to him who Princess Ashtad would be, as long as she remained alive. The emperor's expectations turned out to be justified, and he found his beloved princess there. She was lying on the grass unconscious, and he ran to her as hard as he could, shouting her name. In her dream, Alicia heard someone calling her, and at first thought that the emperor's knights had found her. But then she decided that they couldn't just call her by name. The young girl saw how the Emperor of Phodia bent over her, and now it became clear who had been calling her all this time. There was so much happiness in his eyes that the girl felt warmer. The emperor immediately asked how she felt and whether the princess was injured. Alicia replied that everything was fine and asked why his clothes and face were covered in blood. Alicia asked if the emperor had been attacked by a beast and reached out to wipe the traces of blood from his face. She was also worried about his condition and worried that he would not be injured. But the emperor reached out to the young girl and hugged her tightly. Thierry hugged the princess very tightly, and at that moment he was the happiest man on earth. Holding the young girl in his arms, he thought that he was extremely glad that he had managed to find Alicia, and that he would not forgive himself if he lost her forever. The young girl could feel how he was holding her tightly and felt quite uncomfortable, so she tried somehow to get out of his arms, but they were so strong that she could not do it. The emperor whispered in her ear to keep her still for a moment. Alicia felt how fast his heart was beating and wondered if he was really that worried about her. When he finally released Alicia from his tight embrace, she sat up in a different position and cried out from the pain in her leg. He asked what happened, and the girl said that she must have twisted her leg when she fell. But for the emperor, it turned out to be just a trifle, and he picked her up in his arms and began to walk with his princess. Alicia felt quite uncomfortable, forcing the emperor to carry her. The young girl told Thierry that she could still walk on her own, and it was quite uncomfortable for her that she was causing such problems for the emperor. The emperor told her not to worry, because she is not heavy at all and he does not even feel her in his hands. Alicia mentally cursed that she didn't mean it at all when he carried her in his arms. Their faces were so close that she wanted to fall through the ground somewhere. He asked if she had any other pains except her leg. While she was thinking that I was going to answer him, a blush appeared on her face, and the emperor asked if she had a temperature because she was burning up. Alicia smiled and said it was fine. The emperor looked at Alicia with such a look that her heart began to beat faster. He said that he would take her to the doctor, and that she would definitely receive decent compensation for this incident. Alicia could not take her eyes off the eyes of the emperor, and at that moment she believed that there was a drop of kindness and love left in this cruel tyrant. Already in her room, the emperor asked the doctor how the princess was feeling. The doctor reported that with the help of magic, he reduced the swelling, and that the load on the leg should be reduced within a week. The emperor released the doctor and began to think that all these memories from the past, which constantly began to appear with the appearance of Alicia, at first seemed to him only with some strange coincidences. However, after analyzing all these facts, the emperor came to the conclusion that there cannot be so many natural coincidences in the world if these two women are not one and the same person. The young girl, as soon as she appeared in the life of little Thierry, immediately greeted His Highness and informed that her name was Lali, and she would serve the prince from today. The smile of this maid was brighter than the sun, and she was very different from all the maids, who were staying at the villa where the little emperor of Phodia was still at that time. At first, all the servants tried to make a good impression about themselves, and only Lali was sincere with Thierry from the very beginning. She constantly worried whether the boy was all right and whether he was fed. But little Thierry always noticed that there were some traces of punishment on the body of his maid, so he constantly asked if someone had beaten her again. Lali never complained about anyone. She just smiled and said that it was just his imagination, because she just tripped, and that's why these bruises appeared on her body. The emperor kept saying that she just didn't want to tell him the truth so as not to upset him. And Lali reassured the little one and said that she would rest a little and be like a cucumber again. Thayers also blamed himself for the fact that his maid was mercilessly punished almost every day, because he thought that it was all because she served a prince who was not needed by anyone. The little prince always complained to his maid that all those who had served him before somehow suddenly disappeared. But Lali always reassured him and said that everything would be fine with her. One day, the little prince asked Lali to pack her things and go as far as possible from here, because he was worried about what would happen to her as he had done to the maids who disappeared before her. But Lali only smiled and said that she would never leave the little prince because she was very attached to him. And if they break up, she will cry every night because she will miss him. This maid was like a ray of sunshine in his dark world. And thanks to her, the little prince once again felt that someone needed and important in this white world. But one night, when he came to her room to see how she was feeling because at that time she was ill, he saw that her bed was empty. First, the little boy called his maid, and when no one answered, he began to look around the room. He could not understand where she had gone because the bed was not made. Even the night before, Lali assured Tyr that she would never leave him, and his little heart refused to believe that she could leave him so treacherously. Tears appeared in the eyes of the little prince. He began to cry and shout to the whole room that she had promised not to leave him. And this made his heart even more painful. A man entered this room through the window. He said that he was very upset because he had just followed the elves' tracks, and there was no one in this room except the boy. The man looked around the room and felt that there was still a fresh aura of death in it. He was interested in the question why they did this to an innocent maid. Tyr noticed the stranger and his eyes lit up with a kind of fierce hatred. He yelled at him about what he had done to his maid. The man noted that such a small boy has a very strong character. The man also noted that even without the awakening of his natural powers, this little boy's blood could immediately be seen to contain imperial blood. The man began to sneak up on the boy and said that, of course, this was not part of his plans. But if there was such an opportunity, why not use a representative of the royal family? He did not have time to take a couple of steps when little Tyr's eyes turned red. After another moment, fire simply radiated from them, which covered the entire room and reached the stranger. The stunned man could not believe that the awakening of the power of the little prince took place before his eyes. And Tyr repeated the order that the man should immediately answer where his Lali had gone. The man did not understand how little Tyr managed to awaken his natural strength at such a moment. Then he thought that he and this maid must have been in a rather close relationship. But the little prince was not going to joke. It increased its power and the fire covered more and more space in the room. The boy shouted for the man to answer his question immediately. It was already so hot that the man covered his face with his hand because it would be unbearable to look in this hell. He shouted that it was not he who did to the maid. Then the little one asked who exactly. The man told the boy to put out his flame at once, or he might actually kill him. And in that case, he would never know what had become of his maid's soul. The fire stopped covering the space around the little prince, and he asked the stranger what he meant when he spoke of the soul of his Lala, and wanted to know the whole truth about her disappearance. The man caught his breath and was breathing hard. He told the little boy that with such a cruel character, he would definitely not have an easy time in life, because the prince almost burned all his internal organs. But Little was interested in the physical condition of this stranger, and he repeated over and over again the question of where his Lali had gone and what kind of old man he was just talking about the soul of his servant. The stranger explained that one of the representatives of the elves had recently used a spell to separate the soul of this maid from her body, and it was on his trail that the stranger came here. The man said that even if the elves stripped the soul of the young girl's outer shell, the soul was still alive and most likely they took it with them. The man said his name was Woken and he was a half-elf. Woken explained that he had a personal score with the elves, and that was why he was looking for their vault, which was why he was in this room. They both looked at the empty bed where the little prince's maid had recently been, and Woken said that now he thought Tyr had personal scores with the elves too. The man asked if the little prince would like to join him so that they could continue to search for the elves together, because each of them had a personal business with them. But the little guy said in all seriousness that first he needs to regain the right to rule in his empire of Phodia. The little prince stated that Lali should be completely safe in his own empire when he next returned home, and he would be able to protect her 100%. Early in the morning, when the sun's rays were already breaking through the windows to Alicia's bedroom, she finally opened her eyes. The first thing she thought about was how long she had been asleep, thanks to the magic potion. Unexpectedly, she heard the Emperor's voice, who asked if she had finally woken up. The surprised girl looked in his direction and asked how long he had been in her room. The Emperor said that he had been here since last night and asked how she was feeling. Alicia was very pleased that Tyr was so genuinely concerned about her well-being. Therefore, the girl smiled and said that she felt quite well, and that the bruise on her leg did not hurt at all. Therefore, you should not worry so much about her condition. The Emperor listened carefully to the princess, and said that he was glad that Lali was all right. He also asked if anything was bothering her besides her injured foot. Alicia looked at the Emperor in surprise for a couple of minutes and couldn't decide whether he really called her Lali or she just heard it. She said out loud that she was fine.